Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be having a true crime marathon. But before we get started, if you've not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Ana Luisa Jewelry. Ana Luisa is a jewelry company, duh, but they are a jewelry company that creates high quality pieces at affordable prices. Long-lasting jewelry that doesn't tarnish easily, comes with a 2-year warranty, but also doesn't break the bank, which for me is key. Now, you guys know the holidays are upon us. We just had Thanksgiving and now we're going into Christmas, and Ana Luisa's pieces are the perfect gift for you to give to somebody that you would like to gift the gift of timeless style. And truly, what's more stylish than some beautiful pieces of jewelry that you can wear every single day, even if what you are wearing them with may not be the most stylish outfit and instead is the same sweater and sweatpants that you've been wearing for days because it is cold outside and you are at home with your kids. Is that just me? That can't just be me. Ana Luisa's pieces are the perfect way for you to treat those you love or even treat yourself and help elevate your everyday. Plus, they offer shipping all over the world. Now, I want to show you the pieces that I got. And as usual, I am very, very into earrings. I'm very into stacking earrings and wearing multiple earrings and loving on earrings. So, can you guess what I got inside this box? It's earrings. Let me just show you what they have to offer so that you can see what they have to offer. So let me first take out the Ana Luisa's pieces that I wear every single day. If you've watched any of my videos, the earrings I'm wearing, like any of my videos in the last 2-3 years, all the earrings I'm wearing are Ana Luisa. So let me pop out my everyday Ana Luisas to pop in my special occasions. So the first one I want to show you here is the Ashley Medium, which this could very easily be a statement piece, but I put it up in my second hole because the other one I have to show you is even more statement. But how beautiful and classic is this? Especially with this shirt. Take me on a date, please, husband. Wait. Okay, these are the Dakota Marble Blues, and I just don't believe that I have the words to properly express how beautiful I think these are. These, I like a statement earring, I like a unique earring, and I feel deeply about these. They're just so beautiful. The Dakota Marble Blue, I don't know if I said that, but look at these. Oh, and see, it goes to show you can get something a little funky, but beautiful, and something a little classic if you're a more classy little lady and you want something dainty and small. They're just lovely. I just love Ana Luisa. Obviously, that's why I wear them every day and why I was shopping from them before I was even working with them. So obviously, I'm telling you all about Ana Luisa because I have great news, and the great news is that their holiday sale is here. For a limited time, you can save up to 25% site-wide, and if your cart hits $250, Ana Luisa is going to give you a free pair of diamond studs. It doesn't get much better than that. This is such a good time to shop their site and get something for yourself or something for somebody else on your list that you haven't found the right thing for yet, because I guarantee you'll find something beautiful on Ana Luisa jewelry. So if all this sounds as good to you as it does to me and you want to check Ana Luisa out for yourself, make sure to click the link in the top of my description box. It lets them know I'm the one that sent you and it helps out my channel, and go improve their website and pick out your new favorite piece of jewelry today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Ana Luisa Jewelry for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Ana Luisa that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. Now, with all that said, let's get into this video. And as I said, this video is a marathon. It is a compilation. And what that means, if you don't know, which you probably do, is that this is a group of cases that I've covered in the past that I feel deserve a second look, okay? They're usually cases, when I do these, that the videos weren't as popular because the cases were smaller, and that tends to be a theme that I notice, which is odd to me. I don't understand, but I'm not a YouTube wizard. I don't know how this works. What I can say is that these are cases that deserve to be seen, stories that deserve to be heard, because these people matter just as much as anybody else, which is part of why I started doing this in the first place, is to get more eyes on the lesser known cases, which is what I like to cover, as you know if you've been here. And I know there's a demand for it. I know there are those of you out there who want to hear about these lesser known cases because I am that type of person and I am not alone in anything, which means there are more of you out there. Also, I know that like me, a lot of you don't like silence and like to have long videos from a YouTuber or, podcaster, whoever that you resonate with. And for whatever reason, some of you resonate with me. It's crazy. I don't understand. Which also, hi, if you're new, I'm Brittany. I do this every Monday, sometimes Friday. And I have never missed an upload on any Monday. I don't think ever since I started doing true crime. It's been years. Yeah, that's crazy, but it's true. So if you like consistency, I'm for you. But what am I saying? What I'm saying is that it's the holidays. It's the holidays and I want to give back. I want to put out a video for those of you who want to see it. And I want to shed some light on some cases that either you haven't heard of or maybe you forgot of or maybe you would like to hear again. So if you don't like silence and you want a long video, this is for you. If you just want a long video because you like me, this is for you. If you want a long video to listen to cases that you may or may not have heard of, this is for you. Or if you just want a long video to put on because that's what you want, this is for you. So just keep watching. Today we're going to be discussing a boy, a 16-year-old boy named Scott Kologi, who on New Year's Eve walked through his home and systematically murdered almost his entire family. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes more than one a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. This video is on a case that I stumbled upon the way I stumble upon a lot of my cases. It was one of those articles that was on the side while I was researching another case, and it was the headlines of this particular case. How many times am I going to say case? Several more, I'm sure. It was the headlines that really grabbed me. And the headlines were things like this. 16-year-old shoots family, slaughters family as the ball drops. And I was like, 16? A child? But yeah, that is what we are talking about today. 16-year-old Scott Kologi set out on New Year's Eve with a plan, an agenda to murder his entire family. And he was successful in killing his mother, his father, his sister, and his grandfather's longtime partner, a woman he referred to as his grandma. It is a very sad case. So now I'm going to tell you the entire story of that case. I read all the things so you do not have to. And at the end of the video, after I've given you all the details, I'm going to ask you the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it rattling around in your brain as you take in all the information. But the question of the day is this. What do you believe Scott's motive was for trying to kill his entire family? And actually, I have two questions. What do you think his motive was? And two, do you believe that he should have been found legally responsible? Have those questions in your mind as we go through this case and let me know your thoughts at the end of this video. And now come gather around and let me tell you the story of Scott Kologi, the 16-year-old who murdered his mother, his father, his sister, and his grandmother on New Year's Eve. All right, now where does one even begin with a case like this? Because I feel like there's just so much information to cover because it's just such a messed up case. But I guess to get started, let's jump in our handy dandy time machine and let's head back to 2017. I know that's not even that long ago, but yet somehow I had not heard about this case. It just kind of went right under my radar. But December 31st, 2017 in Long Branch, New Jersey. It's a little town in New Jersey. Police are responding to a call. They get to the home. It's a brick duplex with like a plastic snowman out front. It was still decorated for Christmas because this was just after Christmas. And police, even before getting to the home, knew that they were going to be showing up to something terrible because one of the calls, because there was more than one call that came into police, but one of the calls to police was from a girl who said that she was inside a home where an active shooter was still like doing his thing, doing his shooting, like it was still happening. And this girl was calling from inside the house where she was hiding behind a refrigerator for safety. So police enter the home, and when they do, they find 4 people inside who have been shot and killed. These people were 70-year-old Mary Ann Schulz, and this was the longtime girlfriend of Scott Kologi's grandfather. His grandfather's name was Adrian, and this was his. Like, they never got married, but they had been together forever. And that was Mary Ann Schulz. Inside the kitchen with her was Scott's 18-year-old sister, Brittany Kologi, who had just been home visiting from college. As police move through the house, they find Scott's father, 42-year-old Stephen Kologi, and he has been shot, and I believe he was on the stairs. And then upstairs in one of the rooms, they find Scott's mother, 44-year-old Linda Kologi, and again, she has also been shot and killed. Now, I want to talk about who each of these people were before we get into the rest of the story, before we talk about what happened that night, who Scott is, and why he did what he did. I think we first need to talk about who the people were
that he killed. So, the Kologi family. They were a family that was very, very well known and well established in Long Branch. And Long Branch was, again, a city/town, I don't know the difference, in New Jersey that had at that time about 30,000 people. And I know that sounds like a lot. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh, like small town, 30,000 people. 30,000 people sounds like a lot. But for reference point, Los Angeles, where I live, there are 4 million people. So that shows how small it is compared to like a place like Los Angeles. But anyways, the Kologis had lived there for the longest time, and they were very like well known and an active part of their communities. They frequented the same establishments, like they'd go to the same convenience stores almost every day. They'd buy their scratchers, they'd buy their 6-packs, things like that. Like they were known, they were locals in certain places. You know what I mean? Like usuals, that's the word I'm looking for. Usuals, because they would go to the same place. They were the type of family who would often have barbecues, and they were the home where like the kids would bring all their friends. Like they were the house that the kids went to at the end of the day with all of their friends, and they'd be able to have all their snacks and watch their TV. Like that was the hangout spot. They had such deep roots in Long Branch that the high school that some of the kids went to, this was the same high school that several generations of Kologis had gone to throughout the years, the decades, all of that jazz. So like they had been here a while, to just show you how important they were to this area and how like affected people would have been at losing them. The superintendent at the school where all the Kologis had gone, like for all of these generations, even released a statement after the murders, even though I believe at the time, if I remember correctly, none of them were even going to that school anymore. I could be wrong there, but I believe that all of them had since graduated, but still the superintendent released a statement after the murders saying, and I quote, "The grievous event has left us all with many questions and a flurry of emotions, especially those who were directly connected to the family. It is with deep compassion that we extend condolences and hope to provide the strength and resources the community needs during this difficult time." Stephen Kologi Sr. grew up in Long Branch and had lived there most, if not all, of his life. And he was said to just be a great guy. He was said to be a charismatic man who was liked by everyone that he met and rarely, if ever, had a disagreement with anyone. He was into bodybuilding and skiing and pool and softball. And in addition to being a good guy, he was also said to be a really good father. A father who would do anything for his kids. Kids that he shared with his kids that he shared with his wife, Linda, whom he married in 1997. Linda Kologi was born in Jersey City and had lived in North Bergen, I hope I said that right, before settling in Long Branch, and she had gone to Long Branch 25 years before she was killed. And Linda was said to be the type of woman where everything in her life revolved around her family, and she was said to be a devoted mother. Now, to me, based on everything that I've read, these people sounded like wonderful people. Like, Linda and Steve have been together a while, and they had had their financial troubles, right? Like, I heard from the grapevine, like I'm involved in that community. I read that they, like several years ago, had filed bankruptcy, like they had some trouble there. And even more recently, it was reported that they were at risk of losing their home to foreclosure. But despite that, they were always still pretty positive, and they still did everything they could to make sure their kids had everything and never went without, even though they were having trouble keeping their heads above water. Like, Steve was said to be the type of guy who would just do anything to make sure his family still had money. He would work all kinds of odd jobs where he would sometimes work from 9 o'clock at night till midnight. 9 o'clock at night? No, that's not right. He would work from midnight till 9 o'clock in the morning to make sure that he was bringing enough money so that his kids would never have to go without anything. Steve and Linda were the parents to 3 sons. This was Jonathan Ruiz, who I believe was a son that Linda had in a previous relationship, and he was actually not at the home at the time of the murders, thankfully. And then they had Stephen Kologi Jr., who was named for his father, and then they had Scott Kologi, their murderer. They also had 1 daughter, and this was Brittany Kologi. Now, Brittany was described as the type of girl who was always smiling, funny, and fun to be around. She had graduated from Long Branch High School the year before she was murdered, and she was attending Stockton University, where she planned to study health sciences. While there, she made close connections with her peers and easily made friends. Her roommate, this was a girl named Marissa, she was particularly crushed by Brittany's loss. She said of Brittany's murder, and I quote, "No one deserves a death like that, but especially not her. She had goals and she was striving to achieve them. She was so determined and motivated to make something of herself. It was inspiring. And something about Brittany that I found to be, it like stuck out to me and it was kind of chilling just because of what ended up happening to her is I found her Twitter. I was, research. And I found her Twitter, and her last tweet that she sent out, she was talking about, because it was New Year's Eve, she was talking to people, telling people, anyone who saw her tweet, like, to be smart and to be safe and to not drink and drive, that there were so many options you could take so that you weren't an idiot and you didn't, take someone else's life. And then she was killed 3 weeks before her 19th birthday. She was said to be artistic. She enjoyed painting and drawing, and she loved her family dog and her cat named Jill, which, like, come on, a cat named Jill, that's right after my own heart. And family for her was said to have been very important. And Brittany was very close with her grandfather. This was Adrian. And her grandfather, Adrian, owned a home that was only 15 minutes away from the Kologi home where the murders took place. So he was around often and he was close with the family. In the warm weather on Sundays, the Kologi family would sometimes show up at a local softball field so that they could play with their friends and play together as a family. And apparently this was something that Stephen Sr., the papa, was very into, and the kids would come, and Grandpa Adrian would come, and the family was very close and involved and like connected with one another. Not just immediate family, but also Grandpa. You know what I mean? Like it's so pure and but obviously it's not pure because here we are, but like it sucks and it's sad and it makes my heart hurt. Now, Grandpa Adrian was in a relationship, and this is with a woman who is described as his lifelong companion and soulmate, which can gut me now, but this was a 70-year-old woman named Mary Schulz. Mary Ann Schulz was described by her family as their guiding light. She was said to be a woman who, quote, rubbed elbows with stars during her 70 years, end quote, but was also a talented woman herself who stole the spotlight as she was also an actress. She was an actress with a local murder mystery dinner theater, and she also played the role of a head juror in the movie Death Row. She was one of, I believe, 9 children. Like, she had a big family, and one of her surviving sisters said that Mary was the type of woman who could do 10 things at once, but do them all well. She was said to be a fun-loving woman who was the, quote, nurturer of a younger generation, and she was said to be the cheerleader who encouraged the youth to follow their dreams. At the time that she was killed, and this always destroys me because it's just so, like, she had just retired. She had retired from her job as a human resource specialist, and she was like super excited to see what the next chapter of her life brought. And her family all across the board said that she had like a lot of life to live yet. They said that she wasn't just some old lady, some old 70-year-old lady in a rocking chair. She was like vibrant and young still in her heart. And who says that 70 is not young? I don't know. I'm just here. I'm just talking. But they said that she had like a lot of life to live, and this was all stolen from her. Her obituary said that she had a warm presence, a generous spirit, and that her smile was the type that would light up a room. Now, these murders rocked Long Branch. This area was said to be like all of the areas. The areas. It was said to be very, very safe. But on top of that, this was like the most shocking crime that had ever happened in this area. And part of what made it so intense and just hard to believe is that it was Scott who did this, because Scott, by all accounts, was said to be like a happy kid. He was said to be perhaps like a little developmentally slower, but that he was always happy, very kind, very close with his family, and not at all troubled and not at all violent. No one outside of the family ever saw a negative side to him. One of Steve Sr.'s friends, this was a man named Joe, he said of Scott, and I quote, "He came to watch the softball games with Linda, and he was always smiling. This is totally out of the blue. This is not something I ever thought this young boy would do. I don't know what happened. He was not a violent kid. He was always smiling." Days after the murders, hundreds of people lined up in the cold because, like, it was freaking, January in New Jersey? Haven't been there. Sounds cold. And I guess, like, hundreds of people lined up waiting outside the church, which was the same church that Brittany had been baptized in as a child, which is just like, ugh. And they were waiting to go in and pay their respects. Once inside, the funeral took place, as funerals do, and Stephen Jr. Was unable to even like give a eulogy because he was so torn up. So the Reverend did it instead, and the Reverend said that their entire family they were the type of people that were good in all the ways that counted. The Reverend said specifically of them, and I quote, I can tell you with complete certainty, this very special mother, father, and daughter had that rare and priceless blessing, the gift to draw people together. Now, Mary had her funeral separate than the Kologi family because though she was family to them as well and had been in their lives forever, she still was, her own person, right? She had her own family as well. There was more to her than just like being Adrian Kologi's longtime partner. So she had her own funeral. And just for her funeral alone, 200 people came to pay their respects to a woman who, by all accounts, just sounded wonderful. Now, back to the investigation, which it doesn't even sound like there was very much to investigate. I mean, I'm sure there was, but in my brain, I'm like, what's there to investigate? I mean, like, they knew Scott did it. Scott was seen doing it, and then once he was arrested, which fortunately went down without incident, considering it could have gone really shitty, considering how all this had already gone down, he admitted openly to doing it. Now, after being advised of his rights and him waiving his rights, he was interviewed for hours. And I believe it started around 3 a.m., so this would have been January 1st, 2018, because it was after the new year. And Scott, because he was underage, he had to have a family member with him, right, a guardian. And the person who was his guardian was his brother, Stephen Jr., the one surviving member of his immediate family who was in the home at the time. And I say the one surviving member of his immediate family because Stephen Jr. was not the only person who survived the shooting. So Stephen Jr. did. He was able to escape through the front door. Stephen's girlfriend was able to survive by hiding behind the refrigerator. Scott's aunt and uncle, who lived in the basement level of the home, were able to escape out of the back door. And then Scott's grandfather, Adrian, was actually able to survive because Scott had mercy on him. But we will get into that a little bit later when we talk about what happened. And then there was also a cat and a dog, or maybe 2 cats and a dog. There were a couple of pets that were also in the house, and they were also unharmed. So now poor Stephen Jr. has to sit there and be Scott's guardian. And I can't even imagine how traumatizing that would be because in addition to the fact that he was just involved in a mass shooting that he survived, which is already something that I cannot even imagine the trauma of, this was a mass shooting that killed most of his family, that was committed by his brother, that he is now sitting beside, listening, like, confess to it, right? Like, that could only be, I can't even imagine that. How many times I'm going to say I can't imagine? I can't imagine how many times I'm going to say I can't imagine. But this just must have been so hard because I guess Stephen Jr. and Scott were super close. They were like buddies in addition to being brothers. They would like spend time together. They would play basketball together, and Stephen Jr. would always let him win and like give him trophies to make him feel even better about himself. And he loved him so much that even after knowing what he did, seeing what he did, and Scott being arrested for what he did, Stephen like hugged him and told him he loved him and told him that his mom and dad loved him too. His mom and dad that he had just murdered. So like, he just sat there crying as Scott described the shooting from his point of view. And at one point, I guess they took Scott out of the room, whether it was a bathroom break. I think it might have been a bathroom break, but I can't remember. But either way, it left Stephen Jr. alone in the room. And it was at that moment when he was alone where he like had a little bit of a breakdown and he like grabbed a cup and he like threw it into the wall. And he was just really going through it. But back to the interrogation. So in the interview, Scott told police that he had been thinking about hurting his family all day before doing so. He had been thinking about going into his brother's room, getting his AK-47, and just shooting his entire family. He said he had actually been thinking about doing this for quite some time prior to doing it, and that whenever he got a chance to, he would go in his brother's room and just touch the gun and think about what he could do with it. And he also told police that when he actually did commit the shootings, he felt like he knew he was the one doing it, but he felt like he was watching himself doing it. Like he was standing behind himself watching a movie that he knew he was the person in control of, but that he didn't feel like he had control to actually stop it. So Scott said the night of the murders, he knew he was going to kill everybody. He said that he had waited till either 11:58 or 11:59 p.m. so that he could kill them right as the new year was coming in, which seems very, very planned specifically because like it was New Year. So you would expect at that time, 11:58, 11:59, that there would be explosions and fireworks and loud bangs, things like that, that could disguise the sound of a shooting, which makes me think that that was kind of what he was planning. And I guess some of his neighbors did hear like shots going off, but a lot of them thought that it was fireworks until, cop cars lined the street, and then they're like, oh, that's not fireworks. And then one other neighbor did suspect that it wasn't fireworks when they looked out, like the popping sound started, and they looked out and they saw burst of light inside of the home at the same time that the shots were being fired because the muzzle of the gun and things like that. Oh, and also, so it doesn't look like I don't know what I'm talking about, This is what Scott said in his interview. This is the timeline Scott gave in his interview, 11:58 or 11:59. But the actual call to 911 came in closer to 11:45. So it seems like he got that wrong. But anyways, it doesn't really matter. I'm just telling you. So now what happened the night of the murders is that Scott's family all got together to celebrate and ring in the new year together. So this was his mother, Linda, his father, Steve, his brother, Steve Jr., his girlfriend, Rafaela, his grandfather, Adrian, his longtime partner, Marianne Schulz, his sister, Brittany, and then his aunt and his uncle who lived in the lower level. So before the shooting took place, I'm not exactly sure how long before, but before the shooting took place, Scott went upstairs. I don't know if he excused himself or if he just like slid out like a little snake, but he went upstairs. When he got upstairs, he got the gun and he got 2 magazines, which he filled with bullets so he would have plenty of ammo to do what he was going to do. He then turned the lights off in his bedroom so that when his mother came up to look for him, she wouldn't be able to see him because he was in the dark. And he knew that she would come up to get him when the new year was going to be rung in because he knew that she'd want to celebrate with him because they were very close. He was her baby. So Linda had been downstairs passing out party favors and just being a hostess. It was her house after all, when she decided she was going to go upstairs and get her son, Scott. Scott, when this was happening, was in his room. He was standing in the dark. He had earplugs in. He was wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses. This was his Halloween costume from the year before where he went as the Terminator. And he was standing there in the dark holding his brother's assault rifle. He said when his mother came up the stairs to retrieve him so they could celebrate together, he shot her over and over in the torso and in like the chest area. And then when his father, Stephen Sr., heard the shots and frantically ran upstairs to figure out what was happening because he was worried about his wife and his son, he shot him dead too. And he said that he knew his mother and father had never seen the gun, and that's why he turned the lights off, because he didn't want them to see the gun. He said of this decision, and I quote, "I didn't want her to look at me. I think that would have snapped me out of it." It all happened very fast. After they started to hear the shots ringing out, not knowing what was going on, the people downstairs just completely scattered. Brittany, Adrian, her grandfather, Marianne Schulz, his girlfriend, and then Rafaela, which was Stephen's girlfriend, all ran to the kitchen. And meanwhile, Scott, who had just shot his mother and had just shot his father, calmly walked down the stairs with the gun at his hip, headed for the kitchen where almost everyone was. And Stephen Jr. witnessed this. He saw him walking down the stairs heading for the kitchen and said that he was just completely calm. Now, Rafaela saw Scott as soon as he entered the kitchen, and apparently as soon as he walked in, he just started firing on Marianne and on Brittany. So Rafaela panicked and ran, and she hid behind the refrigerator. And as soon as she was behind the refrigerator, she called 911. And this is while he was still in the kitchen murdering people. Can you even imagine how terrifying that would be? I cannot even imagine it. But she called 911 and she told the operator, like, please hurry, get here. Somebody is shooting. And the 911 operator was trying to get more information out of Rafaela, and she's like, I can't talk, just hurry. Scott's 18-year-old sister Brittany was shot 3 times in the chest and the head area. And Marianne, the woman who he called his grandmother, who was present at his graduation, was shot 4 times. Now, after murdering his sister and his grandmother, Scott turned his attention to his grandfather, Adrian, with what I believe was full intent to kill him as well. But I guess Adrian dropped to his knees and became very upset and emotional upon, seeing the love of his life get shot and killed right in front of him. And he was like holding her and like freaking out. And apparently Scott, seeing this, snapped him back into reality, and he stopped shooting and was just very confused at that point. Once the shooting stopped, Scott's brother, Stephen Jr., looked at him and was like, what are you doing? Like, what, quite frankly, is going on? I'm going to call the cops. And in response, Scott just shook his head and then went upstairs. But he had the presence of mind to put the gun down first so that he wouldn't be shot by police when they came to arrest him. So police hear all this and they're like, wow, what the fuck? And he's asked, like, okay, so you felt like you were watching yourself. You felt, quote, further back in your mind. Because that's what he told police. He told police that he can see that, like, even though he didn't feel like he was doing it, he could see everything, and said that he could see them moving and that he just kept shooting until they stopped moving. He said that while he was shooting them and while they were still moving, he would try to aim for their heads, because he said that despite the fact that he was killing them and shooting them to death so that they'd stop moving, right, he didn't want them to feel any pain at the same time. So he was asked by investigators, like, okay, do you hear voices? Do they tell you what to do? And he said no. He said that he never heard voices telling him what to do. He never heard voices telling him to kill his family. And so the police were asking him, okay, like, do you feel normal now? Like, now that you're here, do you feel like you're yourself? And he said, yeah, that it's weird, but he feels totally normal. And he said that he loved his parents and that they were very good parents. And that's another thing that was weird. Like, it's weird that I did this because, like, I really liked them. They were great. But he also told police that he felt very detached from his family members. And he said that he had been having issues with his emotions in general. He would have really hard mood swings where he'd go from super upset to laughing hysterically. And he was asked, like, how he felt, how his mood was at the time of the murders. And he said that he didn't even know. He had no idea how he felt. He just said that his emotions were all over the place. And then he told police something that made them uncomfortable, made me uncomfortable. And this was, quote, "It's like nothing happened. I doubt I would do it again, but I'm not sure." So Scott was arrested, and he was initially being charged as a youth, so a gag order was put on the case. Like, you couldn't, you know a gag order. They were gagged. It was ordered. So he was in jail, and his attorney was trying to get him transferred to a psychiatric facility while he awaited trial because he thought that's what he needed, but the judge ruled that no, he would stay in jail until his trial took place. And it took about a year, but finally the judge decided that he would not be tried as a youth in this case. He was going to be tried as an adult. I guess it took a little bit of time, not like a ton of time, but a couple of days for Scott to kind of come to terms with what he had done. I guess 3 days after the murders, that's when he first kind of like acknowledged what he had done and had like emotion about it. He was talking to a counselor and he had kind of a breakdown and he was like, "I hurt a lot of people and I ruined a lot of lives." And then he just started to sob. Now, Scott's mental health was the big issue, the main conversation when it came to this trial, because there was no question about whether or not he did it. We knew he did it. He admitted to doing it. It was the question of whether or not he was going to be legally responsible for doing it. And the reason this was such a conversation is because Scott's defense attorney said that Scott had mental health issues that dated back for a long time, and it included hallucinations, autism, and distorted thinking. Hallucinations, autism, distorted thinking. Cool. Not cool, but you know what I mean. Like, cool, I got it out. Great. So here's the thing. Scott did seem to have a lot of issues that went sort of unaddressed throughout his life. He was in school. He had some developmental issues. He was behind in some ways, and his family equated this to a brain issue that he had when he was born. His grandfather, Adrian, said that his brain had been messed up from a tumor that he had in his brain as an infant. Basically, an MRI showed an abnormality in Scott's brain that his family believed was a tumor, but the doctor believed was likely an area of gliosis, I hope I said that right, which is a, quote, abnormality caused by brain damage, like a scar where a dense fibrous network of cells accumulated. Now, it turns out even though this wasn't a tumor, Scott believed it was a tumor, probably because his family believed it was a tumor, and he believed that it was responsible, or it had played some sort of part in what happened to him, I guess, or like what he did, not what happened to him, what he did. I guess he told a counselor in his earlier days in the juvenile detention center, right, where he was being held to jail. He was a juvenile, so he was being held there, whatever. He told the counselor that he wanted to have a surgery and he wanted to have the tumor removed from his brain, and he believed that if he had done that, then he'd be cured and he could go home and he could go stay with his brother, and that there might be even like a welcome home party for him when he got there, which just shows how like delusional his thinking was truly, or like childlike. It just seems like something a kid would think, like, oh, this is not a big deal and I'll go home and there'll be a party. Like, but either way, what was true is that there were some issues developmentally, like he was behind in learning and speech and his social skills, and by the age of 3 he was in therapy to address this. And I guess he was given a hard time in school. He was teased a lot by other kids because like he was a little behind with his grades, and he also was a little bit different socially. So he ended up being pulled out of school, actually, because it was too hard on him, and like it was probably hard on his family to see it be hard on him. And he was homeschooled for a while, and I guess when he was homeschooled, he was doing really well. He started doing better in school. His grades started being better. He was learning better, and he was said to just be like a happy, funny teenager during that time. And in more recent time, it appeared that he was no longer homeschooled and was instead sent to a private school that specialized in education and treatment for children with autisms or other disabilities. And there he seemed to be doing well. His mother seemed to think so, at least, because in a Facebook post, she talked about how great the school was and how wonderful the staff was, and that she was so glad that her son had such a wonderful and caring environment for him to learn and to grow in. So he, by all accounts, he was doing like well now. Things were going good for him. So things seem to be going better over here, but below the surface, things, according to Scott, were not so tight. He said that he was having hallucinations as far back as the age of 7, where he would hear the voices of his teachers or his classmates when he was at home alone. He would still hear them talking to him, and he would start to have visual hallucinations too, where he would see faces. And one of the things he saw was a woman who was sitting on his bed, and she would turn from like red to black. I guess sometimes he would also get like lost in his mind, like he would just be sitting there like blank faced, lost in his thoughts for hours. And sometimes it took somebody actually physically shaking him to snap him back to reality so that he could be like present in the moment that he was actually in. Now, though his family equated his differences, his developmental issues, his social issues, things like that on his brain issue, the tumor or, fibrous mass that had been in his head when he was younger, they thought that well, it was still in his head, but you know what I mean? They thought that it was that caused him to be, just like a little bit different. It turns out that like mental health issues were present in the Kologi family. Even his own grandfather, Adrian, who we've talked about several times in this video, suffered from schizophrenia. And I guess things like autism, border personality disorder, dissociative personality disorder, and schizophrenia, like all ran in the family. Not to say that Scott had schizophrenia, because he was never diagnosed with schizophrenia prior to this. The only thing that he actually, like his family said that he had autism, like that was said, that was like generally known about him. But I guess the only thing he was actually diagnosed with officially was attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so ADHD. Though the defense would claim that Scott was suffering from untreated schizophrenia, and the prosecution would state that they believed he had autism spectrum disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. But these are things that they were saying after the fact, when initially he was only diagnosed with ADHD prior to all of this happening. Now, what's really sad about this case for me is that though people outside the home were completely shocked, they were gobsmacked really by the fact that this picturesque family was destroyed by a loving, happy, mentally well son. People inside the home knew that that wasn't the case and that there were some things going on with Scott. Apparently, Scott had been pretty vocal with several of his family members about his declining mental health. He would tell his grandfather, Adrian, who he was... I wonder if you guys heard that. He would tell his grandfather, Adrian, whom he was very close with, that he would have these hallucinations and that he would picture himself having to stab his grandmother, which was Adrian's longtime girlfriend, Mary. And his grandfather would tell him like, oh, just try to get your mind off of it. Think about something else. Read, take a shower, just anything else. But Scott would tell him like, but the thing is that sometimes these thoughts turn into urges. And I guess Adrian did tell Steve and Linda about this. He told them that he was worried, that he was scared because Scott would talk about wanting to murder his entire family. And I don't know what they would say to him in response, but I guess in response, Scott got very mad at him. Scott felt betrayed that he had broken his trust and told his parents what he had told him, And I guess it was really hard for him because Adrian was where he was also like very close with Brittany. He was also very close with Scott. And Scott considered Adrian to be like his best friend. His grandpa was like his best friend. And he would go over to his house all the time, almost every day. Because I guess Adrian was disabled and used a walker. So Scott would go over to like help him and spend time with him. The thing is, though, that Adrian isn't the only person who knew about Scott's issues and his fantasies and his urges. I guess his mother, Linda, did as well. It came out that on more than one occasion, like several occasions, Scott told his mother that he wanted to hurt his family. And that's really concerning, considering there was an AK-47 in the house. And I guess Linda wanted Stephen Jr. to get a case, like a safe for his gun, and that was like the plan. It just hadn't happened yet. He hadn't gotten it yet. So instead it sat in its case, just like in his room. But anyways, I guess when he would say this to Linda, she would just be like, oh, you would never really hurt me. Like, you're saying this, but you would never really hurt me. And Scott would say things like, well, I might have to. And then if I hurt you, I'm going to have to kill Dad because he'll be too sad without you. And I hate Brittany. And then if I kill all of you guys, I'm going to also have to kill Stephen Jr., even though I like him, because he'll be too sad having no parents. It was also reported that Scott had asked his mom on several occasions if he could talk to his therapist, because he had a therapist, if he could talk to his therapist about his, quote, bad thoughts. And his mom told him not to. She told him that if he did, they would take him away from her and he would be put in the loony bin. And Scott just said that she would tell him to keep it to himself, just keep his mouth shut. And that's just kind of how his family was. They wouldn't really talk about their problems. Now, we know all of this not just because of Scott's testimony, because if it was just Scott, we could be like, well, maybe that's just, his opinion, the way he remembered it, or he could just, flat out be lying. But I guess Scott's aunt and uncle, you remember they lived in the basement? I guess Scott's aunt heard these conversations on more than one occasion. She heard Scott saying this kind of stuff. So it seems like he was. And I guess even 2 months prior to the murders taking place, Scott threatened to kill his aunt and uncle. I guess they were playing the board game Clue, and he picked up the revolver because, in the library with a gun or a candlestick. And he picked up the revolver and he pointed at them and said he was going to kill them. And that was just 2 months before the murders. Now, at Scott's trial, where he was being tried as an adult, even though he was 16 at the time he committed the murders, the question of whether or not he did it wasn't really, on the table. We knew he did it. The question was whether or not the confession was going to be admitted as evidence because, both sides were wanting the opposite when it came to that. The defense was like, I would very much not like that to be admitted. And the prosecution was like, that gives us everything. So yes, please admit that. The defense tried to have the tape thrown out on the grounds that Scott was not mentally well enough to have waived his rights to an attorney prior to giving the confession, so it should be thrown out because he, you know what I'm saying, right? Cool. And the prosecution was like, actually, he was fine, and please leave it because that would be really helpful for us. Thanks. The confession was important because it literally told them everything. It told them that he did it. He told police about going upstairs and putting 30 bullets in the 2 magazines. And he told the police that he knew right from wrong when he did it because as he loaded those magazines, he was really nervous. He told them about committing the murders, and he even said that after committing the murders, he wanted to continue the spree and go out and kill one of his neighbors who was a bully to him while he was growing up. And the defense was like, listen, this isn't your average teenager. Because being 16, you should be able to waive your rights. You're old enough to know right from wrong. And he's like, the defense was like, this isn't your average teenager, so he can't be treated as such. Essentially, he is not mentally capable of waiving his rights because though he is 16, he doesn't have the mind of a 16-year-old. He has the mind of somebody much younger. And then he went on to tell the court how Scott might be 16, but he doesn't have a girlfriend. He doesn't know how to drive. He's still very much like a child in his mind. He still watches SpongeBob SquarePants and believes in Santa Claus and even sleeps with his parents at night. And this ended up being corroborated, the idea that Scott was a child in a teenage boy's body by his older brother, Jonathan, the one who wasn't there at the time of the murders. What's really sad is I guess he had been there earlier in the night. He and his then girlfriend, now wife, had stopped by the house to see the family before going to a party in Philadelphia. And he talked about how normal it was. He broke down in tears on the stand when he talked about the last conversation he had with his mom, because I guess him and his mom left together to drive to go pick up pizza specifically for Scott because Scott wanted it. And he said that everything seemed so happy and normal, that all of them just seemed happy and normal. And this poor guy, he had gotten all the way to Philadelphia, and that's where he was when he learned what happened to his family, and he had to drive all the way back with this knowledge in his head about what happened. But anyways, Jonathan testified that Scott acted as if he was much younger than he actually was, and stated that Scott had a, quote, greater disparity in his mental abilities, end quote, and stated that he knew his brother believed in Santa Claus because he would help his parents hide the presents at Christmas time up in the attic, and the tags that they would put for his brother said, from Santa Claus. The defense talked about Scott's mental health issues and his uncontrollable thoughts about hurting his family, and his pleas for help that went ignored, and the hallucinations, and how they were getting particularly bad in the weeks leading up to the murders, and that he was starting to experience extreme paranoia. A psychiatrist for the defense did determine that Scott had schizophrenia, and that during the murders he had suffered a psychotic break, and that he was in a dissociative state, and that's why he felt like he was watching a movie when he was doing what he was doing. The prosecution disagreed, though, saying that he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing when he went in that room and loaded 30 bullets into those magazines and then came down and shot at his family 14 times. And out of the 14 shots that he fired, 12 of those shots hit his mark because he wanted to kill his family, so he did kill his family. The psychiatrist for the prosecution, this was Dr. Dietz, I believe is how you pronounce it, Dietz. Well, they were like world renowned for their evaluations, and this doctor even worked with like Jeffrey Dahmer and also the Unabomber. And this doctor disagreed with the assessment that the defense's specialist had come to, basically. This doctor referenced the fact that Scott was straight up asked at the time that he was interviewed if he heard voices or if he was, if he was hearing voices telling him to do what he did. And Scott said no. And he talked about the fact that Scott had the presence of mind to wear earplugs during the murders, right? This is something that somebody who was losing their mind probably wouldn't think to do. And that was the implication, at least. And he talked about the fact that Scott had even went as far as going online and searching whether or not his brother's gun would be effective against police officers wearing bulletproof vests. The doctor was like, listen, he planned out the murders. He went on YouTube to figure out how to use the gun because he had never used a gun before. And then he murdered his family in cold blood. The prosecution hammered in their point by saying, and I quote, "These were acts of evil carried out by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He killed them because he could. He killed them because he wanted to." The defense urged the jury to find him not guilty by reason of insanity, and the defense said of this, and I quote, "Scott is schizophrenic and autistic and went untreated his entire life. That is the great tragedy of this case. This isn't someone who kills 20 people at a concert because they have some radical point of view or are filled with rage. It was a mentally ill boy who suffered an acute delusional episode. He had no appreciation for what he did or the scale of the tragedy then, and he has none now." So the jury was sent to deliberate, and it took them less than 5 hours to come to their decision, and they had found Scott Kologi guilty of all 4 murders and weapons charges. He had no reaction at all to the verdict, and ultimately he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, and he wouldn't be eligible for parole until he had served 127 years and 6 months of his sentence. So essentially, never. He'll never get out. Scott's attorney obviously was not happy with this result, but he said that this case needed to be tried and that this at least can be a cautionary tale to show, to demonstrate the need for gun safety and also to show that you need to get your mental health in check before something like this happened. And his attorney said of this, quote, "The bottom line is Scott is not a cold-blooded killer. Scott is and was severely mentally ill, but he will be sent to prison to be with cold-blooded killers." The judge disagreed, though. The judge called Scott a, quote, evil man and said that the judge made the decision to have Scott serve 85% of his sentence before being eligible for parole. And the judge said that they made this decision to ensure that Scott never sees the outside of a cell again. Like, the judge was like, no, bro, like, you did this and you're evil and that's why you did it. And so, like, I never want you getting out is basically what they were saying. And the judge said specifically to Scott, and I quote, "He unleashed a fury on these individuals who did nothing but love him. These are not the acts of a child. These are not the acts of a juvenile. These are acts of a cold-blooded killer." Victim impact statements were read, and members of Mary's family, this is really sad, they were saying how basically because of the way Mary was killed, every time there is another mass shooting, it makes them relive the brutality and the horror of what happened to Mary. And that's really sad, especially since we're having mass shootings every day so far. Like, what is today? Today, I'm in January, and we just had like back-to-back 2 or 3 mass shootings just in January. So I can't even imagine what that's like for them. And her sister Jane said that she believes that Mary would have wanted Scott to get the death penalty for what he did to her. I guess as far as Scott's family goes, Stephen Jr. said that he would have wanted Scott to get help instead of prison time. He would have wanted him to go to like a mental health facility instead because that's what his mom would have wanted. And I guess, which is sad, which is heartbreaking, and I can't even go there. And I guess the defense was planning to, or did try to like file motions to get a new trial or to get like the verdict reversed. But the judge was like, no, bro, like it is what it is, so you're gonna have to deal with it, and said that all of the evidence against Scott was overwhelming and that he had caused immeasurable harm. So that's where we're at right now. Scott is in jail. Most of his family is dead because he killed them, and the people that he loved the most, his best friend, his grandfather Adrian, has never even gone to see him. I guess like Adrian's done interviews here and there. I saw a couple from him here and there, and he described what it was like to see the love of his life die in his arms, which is just completely tragic. I feel very, very bad for him. Like, to have that and then have your son, your daughter-in-law, your granddaughter all murdered in front of you along with the love of your life, like, it's a lot for anyone to deal with. He has said that the last time he saw Scott was in the police station. I guess he was there and Scott like looked down and saw him and yelled out to him and was just like, "I love you, Grandpa." And Adrian said he didn't even respond, and that, like, how could he respond? He was like, yeah, well, he has a funny way of showing love. I just feel so bad for Adrian and Jonathan and Stephen Jr. Like, oh my God, because, okay, here's the thing. Especially where it comes to Stephen Jr. and Adrian, like, they were in that house. They got out physically okay, right? They weren't physically harmed, but the guilt they must have, like the survivor's guilt they must have, and the trauma from being in that house and seeing what they saw and hearing what they heard, that's just like, that's too much for anybody, you know? I don't know how anybody goes on like that. And, you know, speaking of Stephen Jr., I want to end this video on a quote, something he said, which is actually something he wrote after his family was killed on literally January 1st, I believe it was, after they were killed, like the day they were killed. He wrote a eulogy of sorts for his family on Instagram. And I want to read that to you because I feel like it was very touching. It got my heart, and I feel like that's the best way to end this video. So Stephen said of his family, and I quote, "My New Year's resolution is to be as great of a parent as my parents were to me. I know many of you don't want to read long bios, but they were the greatest parents I could ask for. Never once was I without a hot meal or a roof over my head. They made sure Christmas came every year, even though they struggled financially. I cannot even describe the type of people they were, so just believe me when I say how great they were. As for my sister, she was so beautiful and smart. Good luck to everyone out there during this new year." And then he ended with, "Please, please remember to give the ones you love an extra kiss or I love you." And with that statement, that, my friends, is the story of the murders of the Kologi family and Mary Ann Schulz at the hands of 16-year-old Scott Kologi. I hope you found this case to be interesting and informative, and I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for remembering Linda, Steve, Brittany, and Mary with me today. And now that I've given you all the information today, I want to revisit the question of the day. Well, the questions, because I gave you two, and that were these. 1, what do you think Scott's motive was for the shooting spree that he went on that New Year's Eve? And 2, do you believe he should have been found legally responsible for the murders? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Today, we're going to be discussing the absolutely horrific and pointless murders of 70-year-old Charles Severance and his wife, 70-year-old Shirley Severance. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. Today I'm bringing you a video out of Sterling, Colorado, and I was thinking about it when I was like typing my notes. We've been doing a lot of Colorado cases, right? Maybe it's just like the word Colorado sticks out in my head, but I feel like a lot of cases I've covered have been in Colorado, and it makes me wonder, like, are you guys okay over there? Are you safe? Do you feel safe? Because my friends, literally, we had Friendsgiving last week, and my best friend was like, let's all move to Colorado, you know, start a compound, live on a big piece of land, all of us together, all of us adults, all of us kids. You know how you and your friends talk. And we actually are all talking about moving to the same state at some point, you know, and he was like, how about we throw Colorado in the mix? And now I'm like, do I want to go to Colorado? Everything bad seems to be happening over in Colorado. Anyways, this is a case that I had never heard of before. This seems to be the theme recently. I'm learning about all new cases. I don't even know how I came upon this one. I really don't, because it wasn't a subscriber suggestion. It's just something that I stumbled upon while perusing the interwebs. And man, it is so messed up. And so I went on YouTube to see if anybody had covered it yet, because, you know, I like to do lesser known cases, and no coverage. And I was like, how? Because it's so wild. And every single thing I read, I was just like, you know, I could not stop reading it. So I have looked into so much information, so now I can come and bring it to you all in one concise place. Here. I did all the work, so you don't have to. So today I'm going to tell you that whole story, and while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup and morbid makeup. Now, if that's not really your thing, that's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel that gives you this information in a way that you prefer. But if you're on the fence, maybe stick around. You could be surprised by how much you like me. And I actually don't do very many true crime and makeup videos anymore, so if this isn't your thing, just check back next week, because it probably is just regular true crime narration. And now, real quick, at the end of this video, after I've given you all the information, I want you to answer the question of the day. And I'm going to kind of give it to you now so you can rattle it around in your head as we go. But wait until you have all the information to come to a conclusion, okay? The question of the day is this. Do you think the sentences that were given to Shirley and Charles's murderers were justice? Let me know your thoughts down below at the end of this video. And now that I've said all of the things, come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrible murders of Charles and Shirley Severance. All right, to get started, let's jump in our handy-dandy time machine and head to 2014 in Sterling, Colorado. Sterling, Colorado is a small city on Colorado's rural northeastern plains, which is about 110 miles away from Denver, if you are curious about said location. It's May of 2014, and police are responding to a call on 3rd Street, and this house, they're responding to a call that is at this house. So they show up at this house, and it's adorable. It's this little white house with a little picket fence out front, little like metal butterflies stuck to the, like, what is that, crosshatch lattice? Yeah, lattice. Little butterflies stuck to the lattice, a bird feeder, and a little sign on the fence out front that simply said the Severances, which was the last name of the couple that lived inside, 70-year-old Charles Severance and 70-year-old Shirley Severance, who had lived there for over 30 years. Now, this call came in from the couple's adult grandson. This was a guy named Diane Johnson, and he basically called the police and said that he needed some medical assistance for his grandfather. So when police arrived, they pulled up, police, medical, all that jazz, as they do. And immediately they noticed from outside a really terrible smell. And the first officer on the scene, this was Officer Dolan, said he immediately recognized the smell as the smell of death. Now, when police entered the home, they found the decomposing body of 70-year-old Charles Roger Severance, who went by Roger. So I'll probably be bouncing back and forth between Charles and Roger during this video in terms of what I call him, because I know myself and that's probably how it'll be. So if you're like, who's Roger? Who's Charles? It's the same person. I'm going to say that now. And it appeared immediately, like on the surface, to be what they call an unattended death, which essentially just means that somebody has died in their home. Usually, well, I wouldn't say it's usually an older person, but I would imagine it's generally an older person, because like it's more common for just older people to just die than younger people, but I could be wrong. I'm just speaking out of turn, I guess. But basically, it's when somebody dies in their home and they are unattended, right? Unattended death. So they aren't found for a little bit of time, right? And this would make sense because Roger's grandson, the one who found him and called the police, said that he had been away on vacation and had just gotten back. And when he got back, he found his grandfather the way he did. Now, while investigating the death of Charles, they realized that something is off here. And that is that Charles is married. Charles has a wife named Shirley, who is also 70 years old, and she is nowhere to be found. Now, immediately police believed that something was right. Something about this scene just wasn't sitting quite right with them. So they immediately launched an extensive investigation into the death of Charles and an extensive search for Shirley. Right? Cool. And the autopsy for Charles was scheduled for the next day. But they did make sure, the police, they did a press conference to let the public know that, like, this seemed like an isolated incident. It didn't seem like there was any sort of safety concern? Yeah, sure. Safety concern for the public. Like, everything was cool. Baby, don't look over here. Stay cool, honey bun. Everything is chill. Right? That was the vibes they were giving off. Like, yes, this person was killed and this person was missing, but like, this has nothing to do with you. So don't worry, guys. It's cool. We have it. We got this. Shirley Severance was described to the public as being 5'5" and 140 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. And basically the police were just saying that they were trying to find her because they wanted to ensure that she was cool because of what had happened to her husband. They just wanted to look into her well-being, right? So they start going around. They start going to all the local businesses, places that she might have gone, just trying to see if they had any information, if they had seen her, any clue on where she could have gone. And they showed everyone they came in contact with her, like, ID photo. Like, hey, have you seen this woman? Have you seen this man? Have you seen this woman? Deadpool. Have you seen this woman? And they weren't coming up with any leads. Family members started sharing this photo of Shirley around too, just trying to see if anyone might have seen her. Because, you know, it's not unheard of for sometimes older people to sort of wander, you know what I mean? Like, we hear of that happening. I don't know if that's what they were thinking, but that's what I was first thinking. And they were sharing her photo, being like, hey, has anyone seen her? We're really concerned for her safety because, like, her husband was found dead and he had clearly been there a while and she's gone. And the family car's still there. Not like she would have driven off anyway, because I guess Shirley didn't drive, which, girl, same. But, because I don't drive. If you don't know that, I don't drive. But anyway, she's just gone, right? Obviously. Suddenly, I was awake. And no one seemed to know where she was. Like, are you not going to see, is no one going to see this 70-year-old woman just migrating down the street by herself? You know, they were like, this doesn't make any sense. Now, Charles's autopsy was performed. And though there were no obvious signs of trauma, right? So they didn't have to worry. That's not right. That's not correct. Well, that is correct, but I don't know what I'm trying to say. Basically, Charles had his autopsy performed, and there were no outward signs of trauma. But this didn't alleviate the police's fear that something might have gone wrong with Shirley, because by the time his autopsy was performed, she was still missing, and it had at least been missing since Charles had died, right? So they released another statement to the public after Charles's autopsy saying, and I quote, "We remain concerned for the welfare and safety of Mrs. Severance." My voice broke there. I'm filming very early in the morning, which I never do. I woke up before the worm, which is my baby. My baby is the worm. And my mouth and my throat don't want to cooperate, so I'm sorry if it sounds bad. I will try to drink some more water. And by water, I mean iced coffee to lubricate the situation. So, in investigating the disappearance of Shirley and the murder of Charles, police find something kind of interesting. They find that there were some recent checks written from Charles's account to their grandson, Brendan Johnson. And this totaled like $4,500, which is a pretty, a pretty penny, right? It's not a little bit of money. So they're like, huh, that's a little bit interesting. When I say like they were recently written, they were written like right at the time that Charles would have died. So they are like, maybe we should ask Brendan about this. So they bring him in and they question him. And he's like, oh yeah, my grandpa wrote me those checks. He gave it to me. He had been saving some money for me. He also gave me some cash. He had been giving me this money because he knew I wanted to go to a concert in May with my girlfriend Cassandra. And so he gave it to me, and that was all she wrote. Like, that's the whole story. And they're like, that's interesting. That's an interesting story that no one is here to confirm but you. But okay, sounds good. They didn't think it sounded good. Spoiler alert. So police obtain copies of these checks so that they can look into them, because they're kind of thinking that they should investigate them and see if maybe a little bit of forgery is involved. That's kind of what they're feeling at this point. And they also say, okay, maybe we should also talk to this young man's girlfriend, Cassandra, since he brought her into the mix now, by mentioning her when it comes to going to this concert. Now, the specifics of what was said. Yes, great. The specifics of what was said between Cassandra and police isn't clear. It's not out there. But basically what came from it is that she did tell police that she believed that those checks that Brendan had, he had written himself and signed his grandfather's name, which we were like, ooh, that's not good. But when she was questioned about Shirley specifically, like everyone else, she said she had no idea where Shirley was. So some good came out of it. Some interest came out of it, but not anything that helped them find Shirley. Now, the remains of Shirley would be found shortly thereafter, but they would not be found in a good way. The remains of Shirley Severance were found in the first week of June of 2014, and they were found in 2 separate locations. They were actually found in 2 separate states, but the states were only 30 miles away, so it wasn't like a super far drive, but they were found in 2 different locations. And once she was discovered, her autopsy was scheduled to take place 2 days later. Now, how did police find Shirley's body? Well, they were told where to find Shirley's body. And at the same time that this confession came in, 2 people were arrested for the death of Shirley Severance, as well as her husband, Charles Severance, and these 2 people were asked to give polygraph tests. To give polygraph tests? To take polygraph tests. Yes. Now, I'm sure this is going to absolutely blow your mind and you did not see this coming at all, but the 2 people arrested for Shirley and Charles's murder were their grandson, the same grandson who had called the police and reported that his grandfather needed medical assistance. This was 19-year-old Brendan Lee Johnson, and the second person arrested was his girlfriend, 18-year-old Cassandra Ann Reed. Both of them were from Sterling, just like the Severances, obviously, and they were being held at Logan County Jail on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and theft, all felonies, and Brendan was also facing 2 counts of forgery. And, I know that's a lot of charges, there was also a chance of the crimes against them being enhanced because of the crime against an at-risk adult being added, both of them, which would have been like a sentence enhancer, which is why they would be enhanced. Once what had happened and who was responsible was revealed to the public, one of Shirley and Charles's neighbors said of them, and I quote, "To know they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison, I mean, that's just sad. I just can't believe it." End quote. Now, how did we get here? When I used to know you so well. So basically what happened is a few days after the murders, police brought Brendan in for questioning, basically, like when they spoke to Cassandra, and she had been like, yeah, I think he forged those checks. He was like, not he, they, police, were like, maybe we should talk to this guy, because that, on top of the fact that they already felt weird about him and already felt weird about the scene, made them think, like, this is somebody worth talking to. So they brought him in, and it seemed like their gut instinct on him was definitely spot on, because shortly into the interrogation, Brendan made a confession. But it was kind of like a bullshit confession, and he definitely tried to distance himself from accountability. Basically, Brendan's first story was that he had come home one day to find his grandmother, Shirley, violently shaking his grandfather, Charles, and that in response, he grabbed a knife and stabbed Shirley in the back. A fight ensued, and Shirley ended up dead. Like, that was the first thing he said. And police were like, and I'm sure you're like, that sounds kind of far-fetched, that kind of sounds like bullshit, but that's the story he was going with. Until he learned from police that his girlfriend Cassandra was also in the station, and she was talking. And as soon as he learned that, he changed his story. And when I say he changed it in a big way. Now, he was saying that these murders were totally premeditated and committed not just by him, but by his girlfriend Cassandra as well. He said that the two had been planning the murders for at least 3 weeks before they committed them, and that the reason they were doing it is because he believed that he would get an inheritance from his grandfather and grandmother for $20,000, and their house, which was valued at $47,000. So him and Cassandra went out and bought gloves and other supplies, and their plan was basically this. They were going to break into the house, and they were both going to smother his grandparents to death in their bed so that it looked like natural causes because they were older people. And basically he had the task of smothering Roger, and Cassandra had the task of smothering Shirley. They were going to tag team the 70-year-old couple while they slept so that they could get some money. Which sidebar? Okay, so he thought he was going to get an inheritance of $20,000, which really, in the grand scheme of life, isn't that much money. I mean, don't get me wrong. If somebody just handed me $20,000 all at once, I would be like, holy fuck, my broke ass would be stoked. But to kill your grandparents for $20,000 and a house? Come on, okay. And assume that he was right? Because I haven't seen it confirmed that he was going to get this inheritance, but let's say that he was right and they had put him in his will so that he would get this inheritance and he would get this house. That means that these people loved you, bro. They loved you enough to put you in their will, to give you their money, everything they had saved up, and their house, and you kill them for it? You kill your grandparents for money and a house. These grandparents who loved you enough to let you live with them. You ungrateful little fuck. Anyways, police confirm with Cassandra that this, what Brendan's saying, this whole plan to smother them in their beds and that she was in on it, she confirmed that this was true. She confirmed that they were going to murder his grandparents for a house and money. I just can't. She said specifically of this, and I quote, "Together we went and we did it together. We agreed to do it together, obviously, like one get one and one get the other." She added during her polygraph, quote, "The plan was to kill them so he could get their inheritance." So she was very much corroborating his awful story. So on May 20th, the two entered the Severance's home in the middle of the night, dressed in dark clothing with their smothering plan on their mind. But things went wrong, and in the worst possible way. As soon as they started to attack this older couple, they found that Charles was awake and able to fight back. So Brendan and Charles started to fight. They started to struggle, and it resulted in them falling out of the bed, like both of them like rumble tumble falling out of the bed, with Charles on top of Brendan. So Brendan said that at that point he reached up and started strangling his grandfather, who was on top of him. And in the midst of strangling him, he had a change of heart. And before he could stop, like he had a change of heart, he was about to stop strangling him. Good choices. His grandfather then collapsed. It was at this point that Brendan then went to help Cassandra because she was having trouble of her own. So basically what happened is that Shirley was sleeping on her stomach at the time that she was attacked, because again, these assholes attacked a elderly couple in their beds as they slept. And since she was on her stomach, Cassandra was having trouble smothering her. So Shirley, agile, started to fight them back. So she was in the midst of fighting Shirley while Brendan is like fighting Charles. It's just a whole fucking mess. Eventually, the fight between the three of them at this point stopped for a second, like calmed for a second, and Brendan decided that he would, be merciful and let his grandmother have a drink of water. This whole scene, when I picture it, breaks my heart. So he lets her get a drink of water, and as she is there with her guard down, leaning over the sink, drinking from the faucet, he decides this is the perfect time to attack her, and he tries to cut her throat, but misses and cuts her in the chin. It's at this point that she panics, she fucking freaks out, and she tries to run for it, and she actually gets out of the house, and they had this like lattice on the front, like on their porch basically, and she gets out and she grabs a hold of that, but they get her before she can get far enough away, and they rip her back in the house, and in the process she like breaks a piece of this lattice off. Brendan and Cassandra then dragged Shirley back into the house, and she's just standing there like frantic and crying, offering them anything they want, offering them money, offering them the contents of her safe. And she asked her grandson, like, "Why are you doing this to me?" And he responded in a way that's just so chilling to me, and he said, "You know why." It was at this point that Shirley offered them the combination of her safe, anything to spare her life. And they must have accepted this or told her, "Yeah, sure, go ahead and get it for us." Because as she had her back to them and she bent over to try to open the safe, the two decided to ambush her. And they stabbed her over and over before taking a nylon cord and strangling this woman to death. The two then put Shirley and Charles's bodies back in their bed so that they could clean up the scene because things had not gone the way that they wanted, So they put them in their beds and they leave them there until the following night so that they can take the day to like clean and do whatever it is that they were going to do. And once they were done and they were ready to start trying to hide the bodies, right? Like hide what they had done, they take Shirley and they drive her to the Pruitt Reservoir, which is a place, okay? Once they got her there, they tried to dismember her. They said that they tried to, quote, hack off an arm and a leg before putting her in a fire pit and setting her body on fire, okay? And they said that they had planned to do this to both Charles and Shirley, but that in death, Charles was too heavy to move. I truly cannot imagine how a person does something like this. How do you look at your grandmother and then try to cut off her arms and her legs and douse her in gasoline and set her on fire? I love my grandma so much. I cannot fathom this. I can't. It's just disgusting. The two ended up coming back to the scene a couple of days later because they started thinking that the place where they had left Shirley wasn't good enough. Not that it wasn't good enough as like a final resting place to respect her and her dignity and all that, but they were worried that they might get caught. So they go back to try to retrieve her, and when they get there, there are people there camping, so they aren't able to do it. And I can only imagine the amount of anxiety these two must have had in getting there and seeing people camping and wondering if she was going to be found and they were going to be caught. I'm glad that they were probably very stressed for a time, because they are assholes. So they went back a couple of days later on May 28th, and they dug up her body, which I forgot to mention, they buried a portion of her body, so they dug it up, and then they transported her to Nebraska to put her in the much better hiding spot, which they determined in their infinite wisdom was thrown along the side of the road in some weeds. So a much better hiding spot if you ask them. They then wrote the checks from Charles's account to Brendan, you know, the stolen forged checks. They forged the checks, they signed his name. They stole his truck, okay, the man that they killed. They stole his truck and then went and left for 9 days, just having some fun with Charles's truck and Charles's money before coming back and 9 days later and reporting the unattended death. I just really can't believe that people do the things that they do. Sometimes I'm sitting here and I'm just like, what am I talking about? And this is one of those moments, because they literally killed these people. Wrote, like, forged checks. They forged $4,500 in his checks. So that was what was so important, to take $4,500, stole his truck, and then went and drove to Denver to go to a concert, by the way. And on the way, they're like, let's just get rid of a little bit of my grandma's body. You know, let's take care of all that. And it's like, how? How do you do something like that? And then to just tell police, oh yeah, like, he gave me the money and he loaned me the truck, because that's what he said when he was first questioned. It's like, sir, come on. And I also just need to know, I feel like compelled to know, like, what concert did they go to? I want to know what was so important, but I couldn't find that information. If you know, if you're local, what concert did these assholes go to? Because my inquiring minds want to know. So anyways, the officer who's hearing this confession, because all this is coming out in a confession, right? Well, this was actually one of the first officers at the scene when they went to check out Charles's unattended death. You remember the officer who smelled the death from outside, Officer Nolan, where he's the one who's getting this confession. And he's like, I can only imagine. And like, I picture, so stupid. I pictured that scene in Talladega Nights after Jean Gerard does his whole spiel about his German Shepherds and his husband, and the two anchors are just like, that's how I feel that Officer Nolan was. If you don't know that reference, I'm so sorry, but that's what I picture. And he was like, okay, can you please now lead me to these remains? So he and some other officers go with Brendan, and they go to the reservoir where he shows them the fire pit. And then he also takes them to the second location where they recover her burned torso and head. Now, who were these people? And like, what the fuck? And the problem is there isn't a ton of information on who all these people were, which sometimes happens in these cases, especially when they're ones that are lesser known, like there's less interviews or like less interest in interviewing, and it's sad, but I couldn't find a ton of information. I found little to nothing on Brendan, a little more on Cassandra, and even less on Shirley and Charles, which was really like a bummer for me. Because, you know, I really like to humanize these people when we're talking about them, because they were more than just how they died. But unfortunately in this situation, there isn't that much that I can bring here. Basically, all I could find on Charles is that he was born in Washington on April 1st, 1944, and his parents' names were Leonore and Charles, so he was a junior, presumably. I guess he could have been like a third or whatever, but his papa's name was Charles as well. And I found that he worked at a beef plant for 30 years. Like, he worked there a really long time before it closed down, and that he retired in 2009, just 5 years before he would sadly be murdered by his grandson. I also found that when he was younger, he enjoyed fishing and softball, but that in his older years, he was all about gardening, which I think is precious. You know how that happens as you get older, your just interests change. I know in just the last 10 years, everything I'm interested in has changed. And one thing about him that really like destroyed my heart is that he was survived by his mother. So his mother, he was 70, his mother was still alive when he was killed. And I cannot even imagine what that would be like. Oh my God. Now, Shirley, she was born in Nebraska on September 29th, 1943, and she was born to parents Wilbur and Alma. And her and Charles met and got married in, I believe it was 1964. And when they got together, she had like lots of jobs throughout her life. But once they got together and, you know, they had kids and stuff, she became a homemaker. That was what she chose to do with her life, which is arguably one of the hardest jobs in the world. So good for her. And she must have been a feisty woman in her life, because her sister Norma, after all of this happened, she said that Shirley was outspoken and opinionated, and that Norma knew that her sister would put up a fight, and that was the only thing about this case that did not surprise her. And this poor woman too, like, she found out about her sister being missing. She found out about Shirley going missing on Facebook, just like in Alicia McPhail's case. If you haven't seen that one, it's really horrible. The little girl's mom found out that she was missing and dead on Facebook, and it just like destroys me. But I guess when it happened, Brendan's mom Facebook messaged her and was like, listen, there's like no easy way to say this, but my father is dead and my mother is missing. And that was her sister. And that just like, I can't imagine receiving a message like that on Facebook of all places. It makes me like, ugh. And after learning that it was Brendan and his girlfriend who had killed her sister, she called the two young and selfish. Now, these two young and selfish ass fucks, let's talk about who they were. And most of this information that I was able to get, I actually got from an interview with Cassandra's mom. So basically she said that Brendan and Cassandra had known each other for a long time. I guess since they were pretty young, because Brendan had been friends with Cassandra's brother, and that made him, you know, sort of friends with her as well, but they didn't get closer until middle school, and that's when they first started dating, but it didn't work out because they were like children, but they stayed friends, obviously. So since they stayed friends after that, he was often around. He was often at their house. He would come over, he would watch TV, he would have dinner at their table, you know, like it was a very, her mom said that she doesn't know if she had blinders on to the relationship or if things could look different in hindsight, but to her, he seemed like a nice kid, and their friendship relationship throughout the years seemed to be just typical. She said there weren't any red flags to her, even looking back on it later. She said that Brendan and Cassandra just seemed like typical teenagers, that they hung out, they watched movies, they played video games, they went out to eat, they worked. Just nothing about them stood out to her at all. Brendan and Cassandra both do also have Facebook pages, which I was able to sort of look at, though both of their pages are private. Brendan's page is almost completely private. He just has a header photo of like this wolf's face, and it says that wolves don't care about the opinions of sheep, is what it said, something along those lines. I can't remember the exact quote. And again, most of his page is private after that. The only other thing I was able to see is that it said that he and Cassandra started their relationship in 2014, which is the same year as the murders, but it's also possible that it was just, that's when he made his Facebook page. I don't really know, but that's what it said. As far as Cassandra goes, she has a couple of photos of herself that were public, which I'll include throughout the video. And she also had posted a lot of photos of basically like space, like colorful space theme. If you know, you know, you've seen these kind of photos before. She posted a lot of those. And she put that she worked at Walmart and that she started going to, I believe, some sort of college in 2014. Both of them, by the time of the murders, had completed school. Brendan, I believe, graduated and then he moved in with his grandparents. And Cassandra actually dropped out of conventional school, but did like an online course to get her diploma by day and worked at Walmart by night. As far as criminal records, Brendan had like a little record. He had been arrested and served a little bit of time for a third possession charge, I guess, like a minor possession charge. But Cassandra had no criminal record at all. Cassandra was actually said to have like a lot going for her at the time that these murders took place. But the vibe that I got from things that I read from Brandon's prior possession charge is I think that both of these, you know, individuals, these people, these young adults had drug issues. Put this together from things that we'll talk about later, context clues, things like that. But it seems like they had drug issues and that this might have played into some of their decision making. Not like that's an excuse at all, because many people have drug issues and do not murder people. So like there's no sympathy in that regard for me. We've talked about my opinion on drugs. I'm not going to get into it in every video where we discuss it, but I think that that plays a factor into who these people were at this time. Not an excuse though, just an explanation. friends who knew both Cassandra and Brendan, like, peers, fellow youths, said that they were polar opposites, that Cassandra was like studious and popular, and that Brendan was just a bully, and that it was likely that he had made Cassandra do whatever they did, or that she had, quote, followed him, basically, followed his lead. And this is a thing that people say kind of often in this, is that she probably was following him, doing what he said, but here's the thing. There's a special kind of person that can be led into murdering another person. Because I will say this, I don't believe that I could be led to do such a thing. I don't think that somebody could be like, we should do this. And I'd be like, okay, you said so, so let's go do it. Like, you know what I mean? So I hate that excuse, because it's like, okay. But she was still like the type that could be led to murder, and that is on her. You know what I mean? I think you know what I mean. Cassandra's mother, Leanne, said that she noticed her daughter started having issues around, like, changing, turning into a different person around her senior year of high school. This is when she seemingly lost all interest in school. And before that, she was like a good student and it was something she was into. But she just started kind of wandering, seemed to be having some stuff going on. And at the time, her mom thought that it was solely drug related, which again, this is why I get the drug vibe from the whole situation. But she learned over time that she was also having relationship issues as well. Cassandra was. She said that Brendan was not good to her daughter Cassie Cassandra, just in case, like, obviously you're not dumb. She said that Brendan wasn't good to Cassie, and that she believes that his treatment of her led to her change, her lack of interest in things that she once loved, and her depression, basically. She said that the two started dating again, because remember, they had been dating when they were younger, and then separated, and then stayed friends. She said they started dating again around her senior year, and that as soon as they started dating, things between the two moved very fast. Leanne said that at this point, she really tried to, like, be there for her daughter, still be, like, a mom, even though Cassandra was technically an adult, but Cassandra did live at home with her mom. But the problem was that she couldn't really be there face-to-face with her very often, because Cassandra worked nights and she worked days. But she said in hindsight she wished she could have. Obviously hindsight is 2020, but she wished that she could have been there more for her daughter and been there more emotionally and had gotten her the counseling that she didn't know that Cassandra needed, clearly. I can't even imagine how that feels. Like, you've got to feel like partially responsible when things like this happen, when it's your kids, even if they are adults when they do it. And even though at that point, like, it's not really her responsibility to be watching her adult child and to try to get her counseling and things like that. I guess some people might think it is, but they just kept missing each other, you know? They didn't see each other as much. She was worried that Cassandra was going to move out, so she was trying to also give her space, but it's just one of those things where when things like this happen, you're always going to wonder, like, what you could have done differently, and it's just sad that she has to feel this way because of something her kid did, you know? She said of raising her children, and I quote, "I trusted my children. I thought I raised them to do the right thing. You want to think by the time they're teenagers, older teenagers, they know right from wrong. They'll make mistakes. That's how they learn." You know what's really wild about this particular case and Cassandra's mother in general is, I guess, when the murders took place, she was at the Sterling Fire Department and she heard the call come in. Now, I didn't see it expressly stated anywhere that she worked at the fire department, but, like, why else would she be there? So I'm going to guess that she worked there. And she said she heard the call come in as a code black, which means, like, a death. And she felt, for whatever reason, compelled to look up the address. And I guess this wasn't something she generally did, but on this occasion she did. And she looked it up and she didn't recognize it or anything, but so she went about her day. And that later she received a text from her daughter about an hour later saying that she was at the police department. But again, she didn't connect the dots between this address and her daughter. And then once she learned that the code death she had heard, how it was related to Brendan and therefore was, you know, close to her family, she said she just felt scared, that she felt scared for Shirley because of her, like, older age. She was worried that she might have just, like, left the house and got disoriented and lost. And this is something that I guess she had a fear of because it had happened to her uncle before. So she has all these thoughts, like, swirling around in her head, and she has no idea that her daughter's even involved until a couple days later when police show up at her house with her daughter in handcuffs and a warrant. And she says that she was just so confused, and that she even questions if Cassie, like, wanted to be involved or if she was forced, because it was just so out of character for her. She was the type of girl who, like, helped her with like, going and caring for people, like, care duties. I don't really know exactly what that is, but she also said that she was the type of girl who was really careful when she rode her bike places because she didn't want to accidentally run over a June bug. Like, she was said to be a very gentle person. She said that when they came with the warrant, they gathered like everything on Cassie. Everything they could find, every document, every possession, report cards, medical records, anything and everything that could identify who Cassie was. And I guess during this time, Cassie like whispered in her mom's ear that she was involved in Brendan's grandparents' murders. And she like, I can't even imagine what her mom felt like at that moment, but she hugged her daughter to say goodbye. And this would be the last time she'd be able to hug her daughter for a year. So now that we've gone over like who everyone is, all the players, and gone through all that backstory, let's get back to the arrest. So once they were arrested and put before a judge, the judge actually barred them, which was interesting, from harassment or retaliation of witnesses, which I don't know who the witnesses would have been, but I thought that was interesting. And the DA Brittany, we'll call her Miss Brittany. Miss Brittany, same, I'm also Miss Brittany. But anyway, DA Miss Brittany asked the judge to not let them have contact with each other, and the judge granted that as well. And then they were held without bond while they awaited trial. During the hearings, Cassandra had like a lot of people who cared for her and a lot of people who were there for her. I guess they like really filled up the rows, the benches, the seats, whatever they're called in a courtroom. And I guess during one of the hearings, one of her family members even like yelled out like, "Cassie, we love you," like yelled out, and got scolded by the judge because I guess that's like a big no-no. So Brendan's attorney actually tried to get the charges for Roger's death dropped against Brendan, because basically what they were saying is that there was no proof that Brendan's attack is what killed Roger / Charles Roger, and that he could have instead died of a pre-existing condition. They were saying that he probably died of a heart attack, but like I would argue that he wouldn't have had a heart attack if his grandson hadn't attacked him in his bed and choked him to the point that he started convulsing and stopped breathing. But that's just my take on it. And the judge seemed to agree, because the judge was like, well, I think it's up for the jury to decide if he was responsible. So we're gonna just lean with it and rock with it if you do not mind, sir, ma'am, attorney, person. With that, his attorney entered Brendan's plea as not guilty and said, like, listen, we're going to be looking into his mental competency, basically. That's going to be our defense, because that's what everyone does. Brendan's attorney also tried to argue that he should get bond, but Miss Brittany was like, listen, DA Brittany, she was like, listen, I cannot think of a more dangerous person for you to let back out onto the street, so I would suggest you don't do that. And I guess the court agreed. They said that the evidence against Brendan was strong enough to show that he posed a threat to the public because of what he had done, and that he was also a flight risk, so they denied him bond. Which, in my opinion, good, because how the fuck are you going to attack two 70-year-old people in their beds? It makes me so mad when I think of that, because my grandma, is my favorite person. I love her so much. Me and my husband, before we had my baby and got so busy, we used to go and see her so much. It's less now, and we need to be better now that we can. It's a long story. It doesn't matter. But basically, I love her so much, and to imagine these people living this much life, 70 years, and making it, considering there's so many ways a person can die. They made it 70 years, and to be taken out like this, to be attacked by your grandson and murdered, is so messed up. Whenever I hear cases about elder abuse or elder murder, it makes me so mad. Like when I think of those sisters in the Richard Ramirez case, if you know, you know, oh my God, it makes me so angry. And then, oh my God, so when I was researching this case, there was a forum, where people can post about cases that are going on and like local cases and things like that. And some stupid idiot was like, oh, maybe these old people were like grumpy old fucks, and basically defending these murderers and condemning the victims. And I'm like, when I read that, I was just like, fuck right the fuck off, you demon. Anyways, the DA in this case, Miss Brittany, she was going after the death penalty for both Cassandra and Brendan, which they are young, right? So that's pretty scary to consider with young people, but at the same time, look at what they did. And apparently Cassandra even said that she didn't even feel bad about murdering somebody. So, a demon. Now, apparently Brendan's mother, Jill Johnson, who was put in an awkward position from the beginning because she was actually Shirley and Roger's daughter and Brendan's mom. So she had a unique relationship because she was related to both the victims and the perpetrator. And I guess she told the DA that her recommendation was that Brendan and Cassandra both get life in prison. She was expressly against the death penalty, which it's really complicated. I can't imagine being in that situation. But she told the DA, like, I am against this, but she didn't try to fight Miss Brittany on going after the death penalty. She was just like, listen, I don't like it, but I'm not going to fight you on it. She did, however, start a Facebook page that was called Saving My Son - Death Penalty, I believe. Yeah, and on that page she would post like anti-death penalty posts and basically was just trying to like voice her opinion on that, not just in her son's case, but other cases. The page has since been taken down. I went to look for it, but when it was still active, she made a post that said, and I quote, "New chapter, saving my son. Most of you have been Facebook friends with me since June 2nd, when our lives took a drastic, sorrow-filled turn. Some of you are new friends that are unaware of my family story and perhaps only know of it from newspaper/television articles. To summarize, my son and his then girlfriend confessed to murdering my parents. In early September, the DA announced that she was going to seek the death penalty for my son Brendan and his then girlfriend. Although I will never understand, condone, or accept what has happened, I have now come out of my fog and realized that if I don't start trying to do something, I may lose my son, and I'm doing nothing about it. All during this, I have tried to post things to my Facebook page to live out loud, as some friends and family have called it. I still plan to do that. However, I have decided to create a separate Facebook page for it to allow others to post to it if they have articles, feelings, websites to share. If you are interested or would like to be part, please like this page. Thanks again for all of your prayers, support, friendship, and love. It has helped to bring us along and keep going. My love and big hugs to all of you." End quote. And I don't know. She's in a really shitty situation. I cannot imagine being in the situation she's in. To have your parents, the people who raised you and loved you, who you loved, be murdered by your son, your baby, and have to come to terms with the fact that it was your child who did it, and to picture like this little baby that you loved more than anything, who you stayed up all night with when they couldn't sleep because they were teething, and you cuddled because all they wanted was to be close to you, and let them sleep on your chest because they wouldn't sleep in their bed, and then celebrated when they started to roll over, like all of those things, to know that this person who you made murdered your parents. That's an unimaginable thing. It's a very tough situation to be in, and I do not envy her. But moving on, I guess the defense in this case, when they were doing jury selection, he compared this case to the Aurora, Colorado shooting case, the movie theater shooting case, where James Holmes went and shot up the movie theater. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but basically what he was saying is that the notoriety of the Severance case, at least in the area that they were in, he was implying that it would make it difficult for them to get an impartial jury. I didn't see if they ended up getting a change of venue, which I believe is what this article was talking about. It didn't state that it was done, so if you are from the area and you know, please let me know. But I just found it interesting that he compared this case to the James Holmes murders, which basically, if you don't know about that case, James Holmes went into a movie theater in 2012 when it was the premiere of the Dark Knight Rises movie and just opened fire on the whole theater of people, and he killed a lot of people. And I did do a video on it. It's one of like I hate mass shootings. They really fuck me up a little bit. So it's one of the saddest ones I've ever done. But if you want to see it, I would suggest watching it. And basically this happened in Colorado, just not far from where this case takes place, at least in the same state. And it happened just 2 years prior to the Severance murders. But I don't know. He's implying that they are similar in notoriety, but I would argue that that's not true because I had heard of the James Holmes case, right? I had heard of it, like, as soon as it happened, it broke everywhere. It was national news, but I did not hear about this case. But that could just be my experience. I don't know. Let me know if you've heard of this case, but I hadn't. Now, the case against Brendan took an abrupt turn when he changed his plea seemingly out of nowhere. Because if you recall, he had initially pled not guilty to the 14 charges against him, and his attorney was planning to, do a defense based on his mental competency. Well, out of nowhere, seemingly, this guy changed his mind, changed his plea when he entered a plea deal with the prosecution. Basically, what it came down to is he was going to agree to plead guilty to the first-degree murder of his grandmother, Shirley Severance, but in exchange, all of the other charges against him would be dropped, including the charge of the murder against his grandfather. And in exchange for this, Miss Brittany, the DA, would pull the death penalty off the table. She would no longer pursue that. But in exchange for his plea, he would get life in prison with no possibility of parole. Before accepting this agreement, because it is such that's life in prison with no parole, the judge did speak with Brendan and went through a series of questions to determine that he was competent to make this decision of life in prison without parole. And at the start, Brendan admitted to the judge, he was like, "Hey, I am nervous as all get out, but otherwise I'm fine." And the judge said that his mother testified at an earlier hearing that she believed her son was very smart and could have gotten A's and B's in school if he had just tried. And Brendan, though he had dropped out in 11th grade, he had earned a GED and He agreed that if he had not done drugs, he could have been a successful student. So basically what they were saying is like, though he didn't do well in school, it's because he didn't apply himself, not because he wasn't smart or was not competent. It was determined that he was smart, and sane. I don't know how smart he was because of, doing some dumbass shit, but he was said to be of above average intelligence, which doesn't it seem like everyone is said to be of above average intelligence, but also it seems like no one is even at average intelligence. So what is average intelligence? That's what I'd like to know. Anyways, basically what it came down to is they determined that he understood the rights he was waiving and that he was waiving his rights to a jury trial and also waiving his right to appeal later. The judge said that he needed to drive home the point that, quote, a life sentence is not a pleasant thing, end quote. The judge was like, listen, I know you've been in jail since you were arrested for this crime, but jail is nothing like prison, quote, except that there are bars and people telling you what to do 24/7, end quote. He was like, you won't get to choose the prison you go to, you won't get to choose your cellmate, and you'll probably get put into a prison job and you don't have control over that either. And also, you'll probably be approached by people in prison who say that they can help you legally and that they can get your sentence overthrown on a technicality. Like, all of these things might come up, but you need to understand, but that is not going to work in your case because of the type of plea you're making. You are in there for life, bro. Miss Brittany, who had been going after the death penalty, said in this case she did think that she always felt like Brendan getting life would have been justice, and that what she saw as true justice would be giving Brendan the opportunity to live. And she said specifically that if she didn't think this was justice, she would have gone harder for the death penalty, but that she did believe that this was the right move. Which I'm kind of like, if you felt like the death penalty would have been too harsh and like real justice would have been life, why were you going so hard for the death penalty for like young people? But that was what she said after the fact. She also added that pursuing the death penalty needed to be done in the interest of justice, and stated that she did not seek that type of sentence lightly and believed that this deal is just because he'll never be able to hurt anybody again. And additionally, the plea deal would save taxpayers the expense of an appeals process, which is triggered automatically in a death sentence. But she did say she was still going to go after the death penalty for Cassandra at the time, so I don't know. Now, I guess technically during the entering of his plea, they could have just sentenced him right there, but both the defense and the prosecution requested of the judge the same thing, which I think is probably rare. I don't really know. But they requested that the sentencing hearing be pushed because Brendan's mother wasn't there, and she wanted to be there when her son was actually sentenced, so that hearing was pushed. Now, around this time, while all this is happening with Brendan, we haven't even talked about Cassandra. So she's entered a plea of not guilty. She's trying to say that she wasn't guilty of any of the charges, and her attorney said that they were going to be looking into additional factors for her, including her mental competency. Duh. So now we're going to fast forward to April of 2015. Cassandra's in jail awaiting trial, and Brendan is now going to his sentencing hearing. Why did my throat do that? Now, before Brendan was led from the courtroom to begin serving his sentence, his mother, Jill Johnson, addressed the court. She was reading from a statement that she had prepared in advance, and she basically said that her and Brendan's father were having a lot of trouble accepting what he had done, accepting that he had murdered her parents, and that though they do not excuse or accept his behavior, and they do believe he should be punished, and though they are glad that the death penalty was taken off the table because they really didn't want that, they did not believe that sending a 20-year-old to jail, because he was 20 by this time, for the rest of his life was a victory for anyone. She went on to call her son's the plea deal he accepted, a, quote, selfless act because he was sparing the family the pain of a trial. Which I don't know if that's why he did it or if he was just really like, I'm going to die, but that was her opinion on it, her take on it. His defense attorney also spoke on his behalf, saying that Brendan was too emotional to address the court himself. And he said that he actually seemed to really like Brendan. I don't know if this is common. I haven't read about this in a lot of cases, but his attorney was like, listen, in all of the 40 years that I have been a defense attorney, I have never been prouder to represent a defendant. He added that Brendan had gone through a big change in prison or in jail while he awaited his, transfer to prison, and that now that he had time to sober up, he had come to terms with what he did, and he was filled with regret and remorse. In handing down Brendan's sentence, the judge said that he felt, quote, no pleasure in imposing a life sentence without parole. He called it unfortunate that Brendan would miss out on, quote, the things free Americans enjoy, end quote, such as getting a job or someday holding a grandchild, hopefully a grandchild that would not have grown up to murder him. He didn't say that. I say that. But he did add that Brendan had stolen the life of his grandmother and that therefore his punishment was fair and just. He then offered 3 hopes for Brendan: that he will be of use to his new community that he will now be forced to be a part of, that he will find forgiveness from his family, and that he would find forgiveness from God, because then he would truly be free. The judge then left the courtroom, and Brendan's family was left to stand there, cry, and hug. Now, Cassandra. In May of 2015, she was set to have a status conference, which basically they'd just be going and discussing like how things were proceeding, the trial, etc., etc. These happen a lot in cases. Like status conferences, they are a thing. Anyways, everyone was taken aback, blown away when, boom, Shyamalan twist, this status conference became a sentencing hearing when Cassandra, like Brendan, entered in a plea agreement. Cassandra pled guilty to 2 charges, the second-degree murder charge for Charles Roger Severance, so at least he got some justice, because I was pissed off when it came to Brendan, and then a first-degree assault with a deadly weapon on an at-risk victim, which resulted in the death of 70-year-old Shirley Severance. So they're like, you didn't kill her, but you kind of killed her. You know what I mean? Like, it was adjacent. The DA, Miss Brittany, told the court that basically Cassandra had not inflicted any of the final blows, like the fatal blows on either Charles or Shirley, though she had tried, and that the whole idea was Brendan's, basically. Even though text messages and Facebook messages showed that Cassandra was pretty on board with the whole situation, the DA argued, or said that it could be argued, how serious Cassandra was about the whole thing. But I would argue that Cassandra was pretty serious about the whole thing, since she literally went through with it. Miss Brittany tried to say that it was Brendan who had something to gain because it was his grandparents, he'd get the money, like he was the greater of all evils. But I mean, Cassandra, if she had nothing to gain, that's even worse. But I think she did have something to gain since she was dating Brendan, and she probably felt like she could have had some of that money and maybe lived in that house. But DA Miss Brittany basically was trying to put the whole thing on Brendan, or at least most of the blame on Brendan, which, maybe he was like the mastermind, right? She said that he had committed the most serious of mortal sins by killing his own family members, and that Cassandra didn't even have any connection to the Severances, which I would argue is maybe worse for a person to just go out and kill 2 people when you have no connection and you have nothing to gain, which is basically what they were going with, like, you have no connection, you have nothing to gain, da 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 da. But I think that that's somehow scarier. But I would also argue that she probably thought she did have something to gain because she was dating Brendan. So if he got that money in that house, she probably thought she'd get a little something from that as well. But let's say she didn't think that, which I doubt. I'm sure she thought that, but let's just say that she didn't think she was going to gain from this. So going out and murdering your grandparents for money in a house, that's cold-blooded. But going out and murdering 2 people because of nothing, because your boyfriend says so, and thinking you're going to get nothing out of that, that's a different kind of evil. Her defense attorney tried to address the court and make her, paint Cassandra in a good light, saying that they did many, many interviews in the process of investigating the case, and everyone they spoke to basically had the same sentiment about Cassandra, and that's that she was a good girl. She was a good girl who was good in school, extracurricular activities, had a bright future ahead of her, all of that jazz. Cassandra was, quote, on her way to a bright future, end quote, her attorney said. But like her potential was also said to, quote, pale in comparison to the monstrous acts that are deserving of the greatest condemnation we as a community can impose. Now, sure, their interviews showed that she had been mostly seen as a, quote, good girl, but it also showed that in the months before the murder, Cassandra had changed a lot. She made a drastic change in a short amount of time. The once honor student dropped out of school, started using drugs every day, and her attorney described what she was going through as a downward spiral. Her attorney said that she was imperfect and damaged, and then basically tried to blame the whole thing on drugs, saying that while under the influence, she did some things that she probably, they didn't say probably, that she did some things that normally she would never do, which is probably true. I wouldn't imagine, I don't know her. Maybe she would have. I don't know. I do think drugs make people do things they wouldn't normally do, but that doesn't mean that they're not accountable for the things that they do. Especially when murdering a person is the thing that you've done. Her attorney also said that, basically said that the plea agreement they made proved that justice can be mercy. Justice can be mercy. And that the attorney, were happy that the death penalty was taken off the table Jesus, I can't talk, for both Cassandra and Brendan, and said this attorney too was like, I'm proud to have served, to have worked with Cassandra, and their hope for Cassandra was that she would leave prison older and wiser. Now Jill, Shirley and Charles's daughter, Brendan's mother, she said that she didn't really agree with what the prosecution was doing with Cassandra now, because she felt that Cassandra should have gotten the same sentence that her son got, but the DA disagreed. The DA said that this is a really hard line to draw as a mother and as a victim, but that her job as the DA was to balance justice and what was right, and that wasn't an easy thing to do, and that everyone's going to have an opinion on how the sentencing should go, but it's her job to actually determine what it should be. Miss Brittany said that basically Cassandra took part in every single thing that Brendan did, but that, like Brendan, she was also cooperative with police and even helped lead police to Shirley's remains. And that though these sentences are technically different, the outcome is basically the same. DA Brittany said that Cassandra, quote, must be punished for these terrible murders, and ultimately she was sentenced to consecutive terms of 48 years and 32 years, totaling 80 years, followed by 5 years of mandatory parole. And in exchange, the 13 original counts were dropped, along with another charge that she got while in prison, a contraband charge that she got while she was in jail, because I guess she still couldn't stay out of trouble. And it appears that generally it is customary for her to have to serve 75% of her sentence before being eligible for parole, but that the Department of Corrections may not honor that mandate, but that she will still likely have to serve at least 65% of her 80 years, which means if she does ever get out on parole, she will be elderly. Actually, I did the math, and she will be just a little bit older than Shirley was when she was murdered by Cassandra and Brendan. In accepting the plea, the judge spoke about the main point of this case, the murder of two innocent people for literally no reason. And the judge said that though many people had been affected by what these two had done, it would be a disservice to the victims' memories if they weren't the central focus of the decisions being made. Cassandra then addressed the court herself, apologizing to everybody, apologizing to the victims, apologizing to her family, apologizing to Jill Johnson, Brendan's mother, Shirley and Charles's daughter, and then emotionally, expressed her regret and her remorse and said that she hoped she could be forgiven one day. She also said that she knows that by taking this plea deal and by being offered this plea deal, she's being given a second chance, and that she intends not to waste it and hopes that she can do, she hopes that she can contribute to the world with the life she was given as a gift. And then she looked at her parents and she told them it was not her fault. And the DA said of looking at the two outcomes of the case overall, like Brendan's sentencing and Cassandra's sentencing, she said, quote, "This is justice." Now, there isn't a lot of information on Brendan's family out there. I looked and I didn't see many reports. I did see one that said that Jill Johnson wasn't really doing interviews and she didn't really want to, talk about it with the media, which is totally understandable. I 100% get it. And I think part of the reason that there isn't as much coverage, people coming out and talking about the victims and the perpetrators, is just because cases from smaller areas don't tend to get as much coverage. You know what I mean? If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead, which is crazy to me because I would feel like this is something people would talk about because of how horrific it is. But the media picks and chooses who they find to be important to talk about, which is really sad. But there just wasn't that much information out there for me to bring to you. The most information I got on the backstory on Cassandra and Brendan was from, again, Cassandra's mother. And this poor woman, she just said that she thinks she's in denial. And she says she has a lot of questions, but she doesn't know if she wants the answers to them. I did find one thing she said to be, I think, useful and a good thing to end this video on, because I think it's the takeaway from this sort of case. And she basically said that parents need to be involved with their children. Deeply, deeply involved. She said it's not always comfortable, but it's the best way to keep your child out of danger. And she said that sometimes you have to play the bad parent in order to keep your kids out of trouble. She said, quote, "Oftentimes parenting is a battle of wills, the teenager versus the parent," end quote. And she said that parents just need to be aggressively involved in their children's lives, even if their children dislike the attention. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "No matter how much you trust your children, you still need to be in their business. You do. You need to suck it up and fight with your children." And with that quote, that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Shirley and Charles Severance. And now, considering everything I've told you today, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe that the sentences for Brendan and Cassandra for the murders of Shirley and Charles were justice? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Today we're going to be discussing a man named Grant Amato. And I use the term man loosely, a human being named Grant Amato, who is a family annihilator who murdered his parents and his brother over a woman he never even met. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. This video is on a case that was requested several times from a member of the Brat Pack named the Crochet Witch. Hello, Miss Crochet Witch. Thank you, Miss Crochet Witch. I told you guys, if you just comment over and over on every video you watch the case that you want me to cover, if you do it more than once, it's more likely that I will cover it because it's just simply, you know, in sight, in mind. I saw her comment several times and I was like, you know what, fine. Let's do it. And this is a case that I did know about. Like, I definitely remembered Grant Amato's stupid face, like I'd seen it. I watched part of the trial on YouTube, but I learned about the case in a very surface level sort of way, and now that I've done a deep dive into it, wow, 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 it's so sad. If you know this case, you know, and if you don't, it just feels like Grant's family did everything they could for him. They loved him, they coddled him, they tried to protect him from himself and from the law, quite frankly, and in response, he murdered all of them, and then went on to try to disrespect and ruin the memory of the person who he was arguably the closest with, his own brother. So today I'm going to tell you that entire story, and it's a long one. Buckle in. It is a long one and it's a messed up one. But at the end of the video, I want you to answer a question of the day, and that is this. But I want you to absorb all the information first. Don't leave it now. Do you believe that Grant Amato murdered his family as an act of anger because they had outed him to the woman that he loved as a fake? Or do you think he murdered them so that he could benefit monetarily from them, from their deaths, to fuel his obsession? Now, with all of that said, I'm going to tell you the story now. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of Grant Amato, the family annihilator. And I want to start today's video off, as I most of the time do, sometimes do, often do, and that's with a quote that I think will adequately wet your whistle for what we're going to be discussing today. It'll give you an idea of the content of today's video, and that is, and I quote, "Obsession, money, and lies tore Grant Amato's family apart. A jury will decide whether he killed them." On January 26, 2019, at about 9:15 a.m. in Chulliota, Florida, police responded to a call for a welfare check on a home located on Sultan Circle. One of the 4 occupants of the home, a 31-year-old man named Cody Amato, had not shown up for work at his job at the Advent Hospital in East Orlando, and according to his coworker, Cody had never missed a day of work before. When police arrived at the home, they found Cody's car in the driveway, and they also found 2 other cars in the garage. So they go and they knock on the doors. They knock on the windows. Nobody responds. Nobody answers the phones when they're being called. The police are like calling their phones. Nobody's answering. And nobody answers or responds when they literally start blowing an air horn outside of the house. So at this point, police are like, okay, this is suspicious. So they decide they're going to go in the home. The doors are locked, so an officer uses a knife to bust his way into the house. And when they do, that's when they find the bodies, not just of Cody, but of his parents as well. As police moved through the home, the first person that they found was 59-year-old Chad Amato, the father. He was lying on the ground in the kitchen, and he had been shot twice in the back of the head, one of which was execution style while he was on the ground. There was blood found all over his open lunchbox, and he was wearing a holster with a handgun at the time. It was apparent upon further investigation that the holster and the gun that was on his body at the time did appear to have been planted there, because there was blood under the holster that could not have gotten there if he had been wearing it at the time that he was killed. So it looked like it had been put on him after the fact. And what strengthened this theory is that the holster was put on him in such a way that somebody who was left-handed would have worn it, because of the way he would have, taken out the gun. and he was not a left-handed person. Next to be found was 61-year-old Margaret Amato. Margaret was found slumped over her keyboard at her computer desk with a glass of wine next to her. Family pictures were on her desk, and her son's graduation photos were spread along nearby shelves. She too had been shot in the back of the head execution style, and it appeared that she was the first person who had been killed. 31-year-old Cody Amato was the last to be found, and he appeared to have been the last to be murdered. Cody had been shot in the face, and when he was found, there was blood coming out of his eyes, which is just so messed up. And he was sort of found curled into the doorway between the garage and the home gym in the fetal position. He was still dressed in his nurse's scrubs from the night before, and a gun, bullets, and his work bag were laying beside him. And his body appeared to have been moved after death. Like, again, the scene seemed a bit staged, because based on the blood spatter, it appeared when Cody was shot, the door that was behind him had been open, but when he was found, that door was shut. So, a whole family, well, almost an entire family, is murdered in their home for no obvious reason. It didn't appear to have been a break-in, like a robbery gone wrong, because nothing had been taken from the home, and there was also no sign of forced entry. So for whatever reason, all these members of the family were systematically murdered one by one. And why? Why would this have happened? Well, to answer this question, we have to talk about who the Amatos were. So the Amatos were a family, obviously, and they lived in Chulliota, Florida, which is about a 30-minute drive from Orlando. And they owned a big, beautiful home. The point is that the Amato family had some money, okay? They were doing pretty well. Margaret Amato, who was known to some as Peggy, was known as just being like a good woman. She was said to have been known for two things: loving her family and loving horses. She was even the type of lady who adopted an elderly, former racehorse named Lady, and she tamed the wild beast, being bucked off of this horse several times, but never giving up. She would ride over to these nearby stables every day to go and hang out with this horse and try to rehabilitate this horse. And she ended up being successful, and her and the horse were buddies. Her and Lady were pals, until Lady inevitably died because she was an elderly horse. She loved horses so much that even after her horse had died, she still went to the stables all the time to visit other horses. And she was so known and present at these stables that after Margaret was killed, the owner, Sherry, had a plaque put up in Margaret's honor that read, and I quote, "To our barn sister Margaret and her lady, thank you for the love and friendship. We will ride with you in our hearts forever." Margaret to me just sounded like a nice lady who loved animals, and we love people who love animals because good people love animals. Bad people probably love animals too, but Margaret wasn't one of those. She was a good person who loved animals. And on her Facebook page, she even shared one of those posts about not locking your dog in a hot car, which is common sense, but some people don't get it. But Margaret got it. And one of her neighbors, after she was killed, said of Margaret, and I quote, "She had a strong sense of righteousness for those who couldn't do anything for themselves. When a good person leaves this earth too soon, you just have to question why. The world needs more good people." Now, Margaret was married to Chad Amato, her husband, obviously, and he called her the moon to his sun. He said that he was fortunate to have her as his soulmate, and said that the two shared a, quote, "same spiritual wavelength." The two just sounded like they really loved each other, at least as much as you can tell by getting a small glimpse into someone's life who you've never met and who can't tell you about themselves because they're no longer here, and just from what you can find online. They seemed like they loved each other. When they got married, Margaret had a son from a previous relationship named Jason, and Chad adopted him and went on to love him just as much as he loved the two boys that him and Margaret then had together. Cody Amato, who we talked about in the beginning, Grant Amato, who we'll talk about at length, obviously, and then Jason, who we won't talk about as much because when this murder happened, Jason was already moved out of the house and living on his own at this time. So Chad Amato was said to have been a loving father, but a bit of a stricter man. But he considered himself to be a mentor to his boys, and he was proud of them because they were also part of the healthcare industry, just like he was and just like Margaret was. Chad was a big outdoors man. He loved climbing, hiking, cycling, pretty much anything that got him outside, since most of his job kept him inside. So he loved doing anything that was totally opposite of his job. Growing up, Chad had gone to private schools before graduating and going to the University of Florida with plans to be a chemist. He ended up changing his mind, though, after finding that working in a lab was kind of a lonely experience. And his father, who was a pharmacist, was like, hey, you majored in chemistry, why don't you follow in my footsteps and try being a pharmacist? And Chad did just that, and he found that he liked it because it was more socially interactive and he wanted to be more of a social person. He loved film noir, building computers, going to sports games. The family was said to be a football family, and their team were the Gators. I don't know sports. He loved rock and roll and he loved horses like his wife, and he seemed to me, from what I could see online, to have a good sense of humor because he posted this photo online of a pumpkin wearing sunglasses that spoke to my soul a little bit. Now on to the boys. Grant and Cody were super close. They were close in age, so as they grew up, they were brothers and friends, and they had similar interests. They both really loved anime. I guess Cody introduced Grant to anime, and the two would like download full series and just sit and binge watch them, even as adults, and then sit in the kitchen and like drink their coffee and recap what they had just watched. They were also big fans of guns. Cody and Grant were, including airsoft guns and actual firearms. And they were both members of this competitive airsoft team called Remedy. The two were just said to have been inseparable. In high school, they decided to join the weightlifting team together. They planned on buying matching BMWs and living in their parents' home after Chad and Margaret moved out because they had bought a retirement home for themselves in Tennessee. And they were like, okay, when they move out, we're going to buy this house, we're going to live together, we're going to drive our BMWs, we're going to be best friends, it's going to be great. They even decided to go to nursing school together to follow in the footsteps of their parents, who were both in the medical field. Margaret was an operations manager for a healthcare company, I believe. And then Chad Amato was a pharmacist at CVS. Pharmacist at CVS. Now this is where our story is going to take a turn. This is where things start to go south for Grant Amato specifically, and this is when he gets a job in the medical field that things start to not be so tight for him. So Grant failed out of anesthesiology school, which is already putting a damper, like a little bit of a hindrance on the plans that him and his brother had to like do everything together and, you know, be the same person essentially. But that's not the only bad thing that happened. At the same time, you know, when it rains, it pours. Grant ended up getting fired from his job and arrested for grand theft when he was caught stealing like $2,000 worth of prescription medication. I guess he was stealing sedatives. It was the same sedative that killed Michael Jackson, I read online. And he said that he was stealing these because he wanted to give more drugs to patients that he didn't feel like were being adequately comforted by their doctors, which is like a whole nother thing. And later, I guess the charges got dropped, and people think that they got dropped because the hospital didn't want to be liable for him like overdosing patients essentially. So he got arrested. The charges ended up being dropped. But when he got caught for this and the confrontation happened, Grant ended up saying things that made them think that he was suicidal. So he was evaluated at that point as well, because they were like, okay, like that's not good. That's scary. Like you're getting arrested and you're saying you're going to kill yourself, right? So he's evaluated and he's found that he's not a risk to himself enough, at least, to be held on like an involuntary hold. But the point is, things overall, not so good. So Grant's bummed out, right? Like his life's not going exactly how he planned. Things are kind of falling down around him. Okay? So what does he do in his time of sorrow? Well, he takes to the internet, of course, as a lot of us do. And I have no qualms with the internet, obviously. Like, go hard online, as I do. He starts going on, and he starts deciding he wants to be a Twitch streamer. So he starts doing that a little bit. And that's fine. That's cool. That's free. That's something to keep his mind off of things. But then he starts getting into the habit of watching live cam girls, like cam models online. You know, if you know, you know. If you don't, it's like girls will just have a camera on them while they're in their room and they're doing things from innocent things to real sexy things, you know, whatever they choose to do. And Grant starts partaking in this, which is fine, except for that Grant is like broke, right? He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have an income. So how is he funding this new passion of his? Well, by stealing money from his father and brother, of course. He starts stealing money from them. He also starts stealing possessions from them that he can then sell to get more money to fuel his new interest that ends up morphing into obsession. So Grant's family would start to notice the missing money, the missing objects, the missing possessions, objects, same, but different, but still same. Anyway, they'd notice this and they'd ask him, like, so what you doing with our money, bro? And he would say that he was taking money, using money to promote himself on Twitch, because if you promote yourself, you pay to promote yourself, you get more of an audience, you get more views, you get more money, got to spend money to make money, because he's trying to make himself a famous Twitch streamer. And they're like, cool, that's great. But his dad's not stoked about this. He's not stoked to see that he's taking money, putting it into something that's not really doing anything. He's not happy that he got arrested. He's not happy that he lost his job. So they start fighting. They start having the same argument over and over that never really gets resolved. It's one of those things that just, the fight stops for a little bit, then picks up where it left off, and they keep just repeating themselves, and nothing good's coming of it. And on top of that, his family starts to kind of worry about Grant, because he's seeming to be depressed. He's seeming to think that he's worthless, that his life has no meaning, no purpose. And they're worried that he might, hurt himself. And he starts, staying up all night and sleeping all day. And they're just really concerned with where his life is headed. But in reality, Grant wasn't staying up all night and sleeping all day because he was depressed and because he had lost himself. I mean, he might have been those things as well. But what was really keeping Grant up at night is that he had met someone, in a sense. Grant had come upon a specific cam model while he was perusing these websites. And this was a woman named Sylvie, who went by the name Sylvie, who was from Bulgaria. And he was Twitter-pated, dude. He became quickly obsessed with her. He started watching her for hours every single night, like basically on a schedule. To watch Sylvie, it cost Grant 90 tokens per minute. So he would spend 600 actual dollars buying 5,000 tokens at a time, which only got him about an hour of view time. And if he would watch 4 hours, which is what he ended up doing, is watching her for 4 hours a night, that added up to 21,600 tokens, which was roughly 2,500 actual dollars a night to watch this woman. It's just insane. He even went on not just to pay to watch her, but he would buy things for her that he would then send her, like flowers, lingerie, sex toys, and then she would use them and or model them for him. And he was all about it, saying to her in one instance, and I quote, "I can't wait to fucking watch you be super innocent in those tempting panties." This got to be very expensive, as I'm sure you can imagine, and eventually he graduated from not only stealing from his father and his brother, but also stealing from extended family. They found that he had the credit card information for his aunt, his uncle, his grandma, okay? And his Aunt Donna caught on to this. And at the time she caught on to this, Grant was actually living with her for a time, which we're going to get into in a second. But while he was living with her, they had actually locked up all their guns because they thought he was suicidal, which is neither here nor there, but I thought it was worth mentioning since his mental health does come in, it's in the conversation kind of a lot. But while he's staying with them, his Aunt Donna, notices that she's losing money as well. So for some backstory on that real quick on like how he ended up living with his aunt, because there's just so much to this story, but this I think is important. So Grant had gotten to the point where he was tired of fighting with his family. He was tired of being there, him and his dad always fighting. It was getting to be a lot for him. He was feeling upset, depressed, worthless. It just wasn't really an ideal situation for him anymore. So he decided he was going to leave and go to his aunt's house. But when he did this, his family didn't know that that's where he was going at the time. He didn't say anything. He just up and left, okay, without giving any information. And his family got very worried because of the mental state he had been in. So they called the police and they reported him missing. They told the police that their son had recently met with a mental health professional, which he had, and that he had expressed being depressed with his life and the circumstances that he had found himself in. And because of this, because he had been feeling depressed, they were worried that since he had just left without saying anything to anyone, he just got up, got in his car and drove away, that he might be in danger of hurting himself. And to strengthen that theory, his mother showed police that he had texted her after he left saying that he was fed up, he was tired of his life, he was tired of feeling the way he was, and he was going to, quote, handle this in his own way. So reading these texts, Margaret and Cody, his brother, freaked out, obviously. They were worried that he'd hurt himself because of how he had been, what he was saying, the fact that he had access to guns. So they called the police. They report him missing. He's found at his aunt's house. And when police speak to him, they determine that he's not a threat to himself. He doesn't qualify as somebody who needs to be, admitted or anything. So they, leave, and they leave him at his aunt's. But his family isn't particularly, comfortable with this. They're worried that he might try to run farther or still hurt himself. So they end up actually staking out the aunt's house, taking 12-hour shifts, sitting outside to watch him to make sure he doesn't leave or that he doesn't do anything, right? And it's at this point that they decide that like Grant needs an intervention for what's going on in his life. So they do that. They have an intervention. The entire family gets together. They talk to him and they're like, listen, because at this point they've figured out like where that money's going. Okay, which we're going to get into. They find out about that. So they're like, listen, you need to get some help. And he's kind of testy at first, but they convince him to go into a sex rehab facility for his obsession, right? And it was at this point, this was the last time that Jason saw his brother, his father, his mother. It's the last time that he saw them again because they get in the car to leave to go to the rehab center. And shortly after this is when they're killed. Now, I hope all that made sense because this timeline does get a little like, what the fuck? Because there's a lot going on. So that's how he ends up at his aunt's house. So he's living with his aunt. She finds out he's stealing money from her. So she contacts his immediate family to let them know what's going on. And they're like, listen, we know he has a problem. We're working on it with him. Please don't call the police. And I guess she was speaking to Chad Amato, the dad, and he started crying. Like he broke down on the phone with her. And this wasn't his sister. This was his sister-in-law. This is his wife's sister. And he's just crying on the phone with her. And she said this was the one time that she had ever heard him cry in like the decades that she had known him. I guess during this call, he told her that he had already had to take a second mortgage out on the family home to pay back the $150,000 debt that Grant had already put them. That's absolutely insane to me. But he said, and this is so heartbreaking, he said that because of this, he was probably going to have to wait a couple more years to retire, that he was going to have to work longer than he had to, but that he would do it. He would do it for Grant because he didn't want Grant to get in trouble and he didn't want Grant to go to jail. All in all, Grant Amato stole $200,000 of his family's money to watch Sylvie. He convinced Sylvie and others in the chat room that watched her that he was rich, that he was a super wealthy gamer and drove a BMW, and he would try to like outbid other watchers to keep these appearances up, even though he didn't have any of his own money. He became addicted to it, addicted to her. He thought he was in love with her. He talked to her every day, and it just seemed to like slip his mind, or like he was unable to grasp the concept that he was paying her for the girlfriend experience. You know, he like thought she really was his girlfriend, thought that they had a relationship, thought that she cared about him. He was so delusional, man. There's this video that you can watch on YouTube of him where he actually sent her like a video of him recording himself walking outside, where he asks her like, pretty please, can you send me a free video? I really want to see you and I feel weird paying you. It's like, that's the whole relationship, bro, is you paying her and her giving you the service that you're paying for, which is the girlfriend experience. But he was so, like, he really thought that there was more to it than that. And you would think that he'd know that based on how much he was spending on her, that this was a transaction, but it just, I don't know, it's like he knew, but he didn't know, because he later says in an interview to police that, like, he understands that it's idiotic for him to spend that much money on her, especially since he wasn't making the money, but that he did it anyway. It's just, he's something. I don't know what that something is, but he's something. And meanwhile, according to Grant, while he's going through all this and like becoming obsessed with Sylvie, that happening on this side, he's dealing with the pressures and the drama at home with his dad being super pissed about him, you know, not having a job, doing Twitch, but not really making any money and not making marketable steps towards getting a job that will make money. And that he said his dad was overbearing. But I mean, if you really think about what his dad's doing, his dad is sitting there supporting his deadbeat, almost 30-year-old son, right? He doesn't have to do that. He's choosing to do that. He could be pissed that his son's being a little moocher and not really doing anything to contribute. I think that that's reasonable. But Grant didn't like it. He's allowed to not like it also, right? That's okay as well. And it was to the point that he like clearly wanted to disassociate from the life he had. So in 2018, like at the end of 2018, so in the thick of everything going on, because they're killed like at the beginning of 2019, Grant ends up taking a trip to Japan with his brother and a friend, which is like, bro, you have no money. But I guess Cody is the one who paid for him. Cody, his brother, paid his way to go to Japan because he wanted to help Grant like have a good time and get his mind off things and see, you know, the culture over there, since they loved anime, like the whole thing. And I guess according to the friend that also went with them, at one point before they were going to be leaving, Grant disappeared for a couple of hours, and it's because he didn't want to go home. because he just was unhappy with how his life was. So now to get the timeline a little more on track, this is the point. Around the time that he went to Japan and he came back from Japan, this is the point where his family found out about Sylvie, found out about where all the stolen money was going, found out about the website, found out about everything, and they were not happy. And this is when they had the intervention and decided to send him into that 60-day program for sex addiction and internet addiction. Like, this is when all of that happened. It was right around the time that he got back from Japan. So they end up putting him in this rehabilitation clinic to try and help him, and this cost his brother Cody thousands of dollars, dude, but he was willing to pay it even though he had already paid for Grant's attorney when he got arrested, and had also paid $10,000 towards Grant's Japan trip. But anyways, he does the rehab program, telling friends later that he had stayed, quote, just long enough to convince his family that he was fine to come home. Like he was supposed to stay for 60 days, but he only stayed for 2 weeks and then left. And anyways, it was when he was released, when he left this program, that it was kind of like a final straw. Him and his dad had a sit down, and during the sit down, his dad gave him like a written list of rules that he needed to follow if he wanted to keep living in the family home and keep having them support him. And basically his options were to stay in the home and follow these rules, or he could go join the military, right? Because then he'd be taken care of as well. But his dad didn't really think he had what it took to join the military. And I guess his dad wasn't like super nice about how he said he didn't think Grant could handle the military. Like, his brother Jason later said that when he read the contract and he read what his dad had righted, that he thought his dad was kind of trying to make Grant seem like less of a person by listing all the ways that he wouldn't be able to hack it in the military, one of them being that he was like too underweight. Among these rules, Grant was to get a job during the day and stop spending the entire night online. Basically, he'd have no internet access after midnight. His phone service was going to be terminated, and he would have limited access to TV, and he needed to go to therapy. And in addition to this, his family would no longer be paying for his debts, and it also said that if Grant reached out to Sylvie again, he would be kicked out of the home. And Grant did agree to all of these things, but this last one in particular, he felt like wasn't fair because him and Sylvie had a relationship. That was his girlfriend, and he should be able to talk to her. But Grant, you guys didn't have a relationship. She wasn't your girlfriend. And you didn't have the right to talk to her if it meant stealing money from your family to do so. Now, on top of getting out and learning all that, which would already be a shock, even though these are like basic things that like you probably should do because you're an adult, it's still a shock because it's a big change. He also learned that while he was in the program, his family had gotten access to his computer and other devices. They had found out how to contact Sylvie and had gone ahead and done just that and let her and all the like people that he was friends with in her room know that Grant was essentially a fake and a phony and had stolen from his family in order to fund the lifestyle he was pretending to have for their benefit. Or really for his benefit, but to look good for all of them, to seem like a, more successful person than he was. And in response to this, in January, so like right before the murders, Sylvie cut him off completely and made it so he could no longer access her particular room. Now this really devastated Grant. He said he would never be able to forgive himself for hurting Sylvie, for betraying her trust, and he said he was no longer able to function normally without her and that he would never get over her. And that would be messed up, right? It would be messed up for his family to do that. I don't know really how I feel about that portion. I understand it. I don't know if it's something I would do, but I do understand it because they want her to know, so maybe she would stop him from spending all of his money on her. You know what I mean? Like, I can get it, but I don't know how I feel about it. And the rules. I know that some people might be like, damn, those are like some extreme rules, right? But we need to remember that Grant is almost 30 years old, and he could just move out and get a job, right? He doesn't have to stay with them and deal with this if he does not want to. But he's like weighing like it's just like with Jennifer Pan, you know what I mean? Like weighing the rules and what you have to deal with the fact that if you don't, you just have to like take care of yourself like an adult, you know what I mean? And he chose to stay. And speaking of these rules, the second to last line on the list of rules had been scratched out, but I think what it did read, because you can still read it, illustrated like what his family was really feeling at the time, what his dad was feeling at the time. And this line had said, and I quote, "You chose a stranger physically non-existent over family. Now, Grant agreed to all these rules and agreed to this ultimatum, but despite agreeing to that, he still did, obviously, try to contact Sylvie. He would get on his mom's phone, since he didn't have the internet access or his phone, and he would contact her on Twitter. Obviously, he had to do it publicly because she wasn't speaking to him. She was like, absolutely not, dog. So he would try to write her, and I didn't see anything that said that she wrote him back. But he was desperate to talk to her. And he said of his feelings during this time, and I quote, "I am unable to function normally without her. Not hearing her good mornings or good nights, not talking for hours a day. I truly loved this woman. I send her messages every day and get no response. She is my everything, and I will give her my life to simply be able to make her smile." Now, Grant was not able to keep the fact that he was still trying to talk to Sylvie a secret, and his dad did find out, and his dad confronted him about this on January 25th, 2019, so the day before the murders, or the day before the bodies were found. And apparently, according to Grant, his dad was super pissed and got confrontational, grabbed him by his shirt and told him to pack up his shit and get the fuck out. So now we're back to the date of the murders, and if you recall, they go to the family, they do a welfare check, and that's when they find the bodies of the family that I've been discussing all this time in the way that I described previously that they were found, okay? So police find them, and when they do, they decide to shut down the whole street. They blocked off the entire street of Sultan Circle so that they could do their investigation. Once police got there and they started investigating, they felt right from the beginning that this was a personal murder and that it wasn't like a stranger who came in and killed this family. They also knew that there was somebody missing from the home, that there was a white Honda missing from the home, and that the driver was also missing, and this was Grant. And they knew about Grant and his car because they had been here before when Grant was reported missing, when he ran off to his aunt's. You remember? So that's why I gave you all the backstory on that, so that this part would make sense. So he's missing again now. But they speak to neighbors, and they do find out from neighbors that he had been there and his car had been there that morning. Now what's really crazy is that during the investigation, I told you they blocked off the street. Well, an officer had seen that a white car, a white Honda, had driven up towards the house, had seen the scene, had did a U-turn, and had left. Now, later, during their interrogation when they're speaking to Grant, or their interview when they're speaking to Grant, they do learn that this was Grant. This, like, U-turn bro was Grant. He said that he had come home, as one does, because he lived there, and he saw the commotion, okay? And he just left because he didn't want to know, okay? He says he then drove to a Panera to get on Wi-Fi, and when he did, he searched top news stories so he could find out what the commotion was. And he says that as he was watching the news stories, he saw that the gate for the home that had been shot up was his family's gate. So he knew that something had happened, but he never reached out to his family to find out if they were okay. So anyways, back to the investigation. They know that Grant is missing, that Grant's car is missing. And they know that even though there were guns found in the home, there was guns found near the bodies. You know, Chad had one in his holster, Cody had one left near him, that there were some guns that could have been missing from the home. So they have a press conference, and they say during the press conference that people in the area should be on the lookout for Grant and for Grant's car, but not to approach him because he should be considered armed and dangerous. It didn't take police long to find Grant. They found him the following morning at a motel, Holiday Inn. No, they found him at the Doubletree Hotel. And when they got there, they were just going to detain him for questioning, but he seemed to think he was being arrested right away. It was super weird. The whole situation was weird. They come in his room, let us in. They come in the room, and he gets down on the floor and is immediately ready to be arrested and puts up no fight. And then they're out together in the hallway, and he's go ahead and go in my room and search for weapons, go ahead, you can do whatever you want. And it's just weird for him to react this way, especially since at this time he's supposedly not supposed to know that his family is dead. So why would he act like this? That's one of the things that I thought was weird and maybe made him look a little suspicious among many things. But either way, he was taken in at that point and detained for questioning. He wasn't even being arrested at this point. During Grant's questioning, which lasted hours, he was said to have been super chill. He was super open. He was chatty. He talked to police about his hobbies, his interests, his recent troubles with his mental health, with the money issues, the sex addiction, everything. He told police that the night before he and his father had gotten into a fight and that it had gotten heated. He was open about that. He said that his dad got a little confrontational, grabbed him by the shirt, didn't hit him though, and kicked him out of the house. He says that his mother didn't engage in the argument, that she just stayed in her office working on her computer. And he said that for the next couple hours after him and his dad first started fighting, he started collecting his things, and that during that process, him and his dad just argued here and there throughout the day. Now, it's at this point in the story where he tells two different versions. The first version of the story is that he only stays at his family's house till 9 or 9:30, and then he leaves and just drives like down the street or something and waits for Cody to come home, where they could just randomly run into each other because he doesn't have a cell phone to like tell his brother where to meet him, where they can run into each other, and that his brother was like telling him, like, tell me what happened. He told him what happened. He said, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And then he left. So that was his first version, which made no sense. Police are like, that makes no sense. So he's like, okay. I did stay at the house until Cody got home from work, which was closer to midnight. But when I left, everyone was fine. Everyone was alive. And Cody told me not to worry, that he would take care of everything. So Grant talked. He talked and he talked and he talked. He talked a lot. He was very open, kind of like I'm being right now. He's very, very vocal. But it's what he didn't say. It's what he didn't ask, rather, that investigators found weird. They were hours into their interview, and Grant had never once asked why he was there, what had happened to his family. So that's when the investigators decided to sort of shake the tree and see what fell loose, so to speak. They decide to show him crime scene photos. They take out crime scene photos that show his family's deceased bodies. They pull out his brother Cody's photo, show it to him. His father Chad's photo, show it to him. His mother Margaret's photo, show it to him. With each one, they're like, is this what you did? Is this how you left your family? Did you kill your family? And with each photo, he started to break down and he said, no. He cried, he denied it. But then he said something that was super, super weird to investigators. When investigators asked him if he felt any remorse for what he did, he said, and I quote, his family had been blaming him for months for ruining their lives, stealing, and not following the rules of the home. So he might as well be blamed for this too. So a weird thing to say, right? Very, very strange to say in the situation that he's in. But despite that, he continued to deny being involved, but he did admit that he was the only person with the motive and the opportunity to have killed them. Now, what's really sad here is during this questioning, Grant's surviving brother, Jason, his older brother, did come down to speak with Grant. And I guess what happened is that even though Jason wasn't super close with his father and his brother anymore, he didn't really talk to them much. He did talk to his mom, though. He talked to his mom once a week, and he had actually just talked to his mom, like, right before this happened, and she said that things were going good, and that Grant was, like, looking for a job, which is just so sad. Anyways, Jason was still Cody's emergency contact, so when Cody didn't show up for work that day, the hospital called him first, and I guess they were really worried about it, but one, because he was always there, and two, because he was supposed to be in surgery that morning, so it was weird that he wasn't there. So he gets this call, and he starts calling his mom, and he starts calling his dad, he starts calling Cody. He doesn't call Grant, though, and he says that he doesn't call Grant because he had a feeling that Grant's drama is the reason that Cody wasn't at work in the first place, which is just so sad. But he calls, he doesn't get a hold of them, and he's at work, so he's doing his thing, and then a little bit of time goes by, and the hospital calls him back and tells him that he should be expecting a call from the police. So Cody says when he found out about what happened to his family, he was at work, and he says that the whole situation was really scary, that like police showed up to his work and they shut down the whole building, and then they went to him to talk to him, and they told him that like they were very generic with what they said. They just said that a woman and two men were found dead in his family's home. So he doesn't even know exactly who's been killed, right? And then he finds out who's dead. And then he finds out that Grant's still alive and that Grant's like being questioned. And they ask him like if there's anyone that he can think of who would want to hurt his family. And he actually tells them about Sylvie because they don't know who she is. She's just this elusive woman who Grant's given their home address to. That I guess like Grant gave her their address so she would send him the goodies that he paid for in the mail, like cards and notes and things like that. So she had their address, and I guess Margaret was nervous about that. So Jason tells police that, and I can't even imagine how he's feeling. Like he goes in and he talks to Grant and he starts asking him for information, and he says of this, and I quote, I only remember him saying that he had nothing to do with it when I first walked in. And if you watch the footage online, which you can, like the whole thing was videotaped, you see Jason and Grant talking. And as Jason goes to leave the room, like the very last thing he says to his brother, which is really heartbreaking, is he says to his brother, quote, I'll pray for you, brother, because I can't pray for mom, dad, or Cody anymore. I just feel so bad for Jason, dude, having to learn that your whole family's dead, then having to learn that it was your own brother who did it. I feel so bad for survivors of family annihilators in general, because you have to live with that knowledge of what happened to your family, knowing that it's someone that you love that did it, and then knowing that you're likely only even here still because you weren't there at the time this happened. And Jason said of dealing with all of these swirling emotions and thoughts, I can't even imagine, but he said of this, and I quote, "It's so hard to go through the grieving process when there are multiple losses and uncertainty in the future. Through all of this, though, I'm a proud Amato, and I will rise up smarter and stronger than before." So, after being questioned by police, Grant was initially released. He was said to have been cooperative, right? But they let him go. But clearly they were kind of like onto him because like right after he left, they got an arrest warrant for him so that they could arrest him the next day. And by the next day, I mean like just a couple hours later because they arrested him just after 1 a.m. So it wasn't really like the next day, but it was technically the next day. And he was arrested without incident. So Grant Amato pled not guilty to the murders. And initially he asked that no bond be set because he wanted to be able to prepare his defense for trial outside of jail, but that wasn't going to be happening. So his attorneys asked that the bail only be set at $150,000, but the prosecution was like, how about we do a cool $25 million instead? And the judge came to a bit of a compromise, and he set the bail at $750,000, which was $250,000 for each member of his family that he murdered. Grant was also told that if he did make bail, if he was able to somehow come up with that money, he would have no access to computers or online data and no contact with any of the witnesses. He would also have to wear a monitoring device and have to stay in the Florida area, and he'd have to forfeit his passport. And the worst of all for him, I'm sure, is that he was not allowed to use any money from his family's estate to post bail. So he'd have to come up with this money on his own. And when his brother Jason was asked if he was going to help bail Grant out of jail. Whoa, that sentence sounded super weird, but it's not. When he was asked if he was going to bail Grant out of jail, Jason said no. After Grant was arrested, the prosecution was able to collect a lot more evidence that they could use against him in trial. Not just the stuff that they were able to get at the scene and get through speaking with people and things like that, but also from Grant himself, because he just wasn't super careful once he was arrested. They collected jailhouse phone calls and emails where Grant talked about the case and also talked about his family's life insurance policies. He even emailed writers and filmmakers saying if they could just find anyone to post his bail, he would give them the rights to his story. Which it's like, okay. As far as evidence, they collected a flash drive, and on this flash drive there were numerous different pornographic images of Sylvie that she had sent to him, because he purchased them, of course. They also found notes and letters written back and forth from them because, again, he was paying for the girlfriend experience. And of these, they found a photo of her. It was like a Christmas card with a photo of her on it. And she had written to him, quote, "Smile, my love, you make me happy." And it was swapped, sealed with a kiss. And you know what's really fucked up about this flash drive? This is so gross. So they were able to figure out from detective work, policing, doing the police stuff. They were able to figure out that this flash drive was put into Grant Amato's computer the night of the murders at about 11:30 p.m. And based on the prosecution's timeline of what happened and when, members of his family were dead at this point. So he was sitting there looking at these sexually explicit photos of Sylvie while his family lay dead in the home that he's in. What? Gross. Grant is gross. Gross Grant Amato. Yes. Gross Grant Amato. Yes. Police also found a letter that Grant had written to his friends that he had met in Sylvie's room. So, okay, forgive me if I get something wrong. I've never partook in one of these services, but from what I could gather from looking at her online site, because there is still a site up for her, is that basically Sylvie has a room. So people come to her room specifically. They buy tokens. They can pay her to do specific things. There's a menu. You pick off it, you pay. You can tell her what you want her to do, and she'll do it for you, right? And Sylvie had regulars. And these regulars would always be in her room. Grant was one of the regulars. And the regulars all became buds with each other, which is just kind of ew, but okay. So all these dudes that watched Sylvie, Grant was friends with them. So when his parents went and blew up his spot and told them that he was a fake, they found out too. So Grant lost his woman and he also lost his friends. So he wrote a letter to these people. And in this letter, it kind of gave you some insight into Grant's mind at that time. He wrote to them that his dad was controlling, that his brother was controlling as well and didn't understand how Grant could love Sylvie so much, and that his mother was simply around for security, whatever that means. He also said in this letter of lying to Sylvie, and I quote, "I hate myself for what I did, and I hate the thought of never getting to be with her again. After everything that I gave and everything that I tried to do with her, I just can't comprehend being without her. So he did what he had to do, right? Idiot. Police also spoke to Cody's girlfriend, Sloan, and it's actually so sad. Okay, they had just started dating, I guess. They worked together at the hospital, and they had been friends first, and just in like the months right before he was killed, they started like a quiet little relationship. And I just don't know how you deal with that. Like, I imagine being in her position and having to deal with the fact that you kind of had a future stolen from you that never quite got started in the first place, and like knowing how to appropriately feel about that. I don't know how to really explain it, but I just imagine like the people in my life, not romantically obviously, but the people in my life that I care a lot about, like friends who are distant friends, you know, like friends online, for example, friends that you know and that you see and you talk to often, but you don't like hang out with often. And if something was to happen to them, like how you would deal with that like separation of like caring a lot, but what's appropriate. It just seems really weird. I don't know how to explain it, but I just feel like that's super, super sad. She just said that Cody was like the best person, that he was a really nice guy with like a positive attitude, like a good outlook on life, that he seemed just like a good person, and that his loss was felt profoundly with them. And she said that like, it's hard to come to terms with the fact that he'll always just be 31 years old. It's just like what Mickey Schoenig's mom said, that she'll forever be 21, he'll forever be 31, and that's really hard for her to like grasp. But anyways, I got off on a thing there because it's just really sad to me, because these are like real people and their lives are really gone, and I get really consumed in that because it's important. But anyway, when they spoke to Sloan, she gave them a bit of information that is really eerie. It's something that Cody said, that in what happened here, in finding what happened here and how this all played out, it's incredibly eerie. She said that Cody told her that he was worried that Grant would kill everyone. And considering that he did, it's so fucked up that Cody felt that and knew that. That makes my heart just like hurt. So police also searched Grant's car, and it was when searching Grant's car that they found a piece to the puzzle that kind of explained like the weird things at the scene, the stage things at the scene, the bodies being moved, the holster being put on Chad, the gun and the bullets being put near Cody. It seemed to police, based on what they found in his car, that Grant was going to try to make it seem like Cody had killed his parents and then killed himself. Now I'm going to get on to my thoughts about that specifically a little bit later, because I think we'll get to that later, but that's what police believed. That Grant was going to try to frame Cody after he was dead for killing his parents. So basically what they found inside the car was a letter. It was written by Grant, but was written from Cody's point of view. It was written like it was written by Cody. And this letter read, and I quote, "Grant, I'll take care of all your problems. I just need you back. I can't live without you, brother. I said I'd take care of all your problems at the house, and I have. No one will ever bother you again regarding this. Just please come home." Now, police did ask Grant about this, obviously, because that's fucking weird. They were like, what the fuck is this? And he said that he was just jotting down the last conversation he had with his brother for whatever reason, right? But when they asked, like, okay, why is it written from Cody's point of view? Like he wrote it, he couldn't really explain that. But police were pretty sure they knew why, right? Like, he might have not admitted why, but they believed that it's because Grant wanted to make it seem like he had left, and his brother, who he was so close with, who everyone said Cody would do anything for Grant. Cody had taken care of all Grant's problems by killing their parents, and then maybe felt so bad about it that he then took his own life. It wasn't hard to disprove this, though. It wasn't hard to disprove this flimsy frame job, because it's either that Grant was like super lazy and didn't try that hard, or didn't really understand forensics at all and was just kind of like doing what he thought would be effective, but was totally ineffective. Now, first, and this is a pretty big one, is it was found, the pathologist who did the autopsies found that Cody's wounds couldn't have been self-inflicted. So that's a big, like, bang goes that theory right off the bat. Next, and this is another big one, is the blood spatter proved that when Cody was shot, the door that was behind him where he was found had been open. That's how he was in the frame, like laying in the door frame, right? But when the bodies were found, when the scene was found, the door was closed. And that would be pretty hard for Cody to do if he was dead from a gunshot wound to the face, right? Like, he's not going to then close the door behind him. That wouldn't work. And third, another thing that made them be like, well, obviously this didn't happen, is that after they were all dead, someone was trying to wipe Cody's phone, like, clean of anything. Again, he couldn't do this if he was dead. So, now I'm going to tell you what the prosecution believes happened that night. Grant has never admitted to what happened, so this is just speculation, but this is what they believe happened the night of the murders. It's thought that Margaret was the first of the family members to be killed. She was found dead, slumped over her computer, and her activity on the computer had halted, just come to a complete stop at 4:45 p.m., even though before that she had been actively working on it. So it's thought that the murder started at that point. Why it all started, like why he started at that point doing this, nobody knows. And it's also, nobody knows why he killed his mother. It's thought that she was simply killed because she was there, because he didn't seem to have beef with his mom. Maybe he was upset with her because she didn't protect him, but she was said to have like babied him and called him and loved him a lot, so it's unclear as to why he actually killed her. From there, Grant waited in the home for his father to come home from work. And when he did come home from work, he was ambushed in the kitchen where he was shot once in the head, but it didn't kill him. There was evidence that showed he was still alive and he was like crawling through his own blood when he was down on the floor, and that he was then shot execution style in the back of the head. Now, while this was happening that night, Cody was at work, and I guess Cody got either a call or a text from his dad at about 9:15 p.m. And we know this because Sloan, his girlfriend, worked with him. And I guess he got this correspondence from his father, and he clearly seemed upset because Sloan asked him, like, what's wrong? And he just said, like, some stupid fucking bullshit. So Cody leaves work and he goes home. And Sloan texted him later to see if he was okay. And he said, like, everything's okay, don't worry about me. And I do wonder what time that text came in. And I honestly wonder if that text even was from Cody, now that I think about it, just based on how he was found. I wonder if he would have even been able to send that text, because it seemed to me, at least like from the way I understood it, it seems like the prosecution thinks that this all happened pretty fast. And now that I think about it, I also wonder about that correspondence with his father, between his father and Cody. I'm wondering if it was a call or if it was a text, because if it was a text, it's possible that it wasn't even Chad who sent it, that Grant sent this text to Cody to like lure him home so he could do what he did. But that's like a rabbit trail that we honestly can't even afford to go down, because I know that this video is already long as hell. So Cody got home and he too was shot. And to me, it seems like he was shot pretty quickly. I mean, he was still wearing his work scrub and he had like his work bag on him. It was found near him when he was killed. I guess that doesn't necessarily mean he had just gotten home, but that's like the impression that I got. And the prosecution said of these murders, and I quote, "For over 4 hours with the bodies of his dead mother and father in the house, the defendant waits for Cody to come home. By any definition of the word cold, these murders were cold." Right after the murders, Grant did some unthinkable things. The first thing he did is he stole his dad and his brother's cards, his debit cards and credit cards, which isn't that surprising for Grant, really. Like, he's proven that he doesn't give a fuck and he's a piece of shit. But the level of depravity this fool will drop to, okay? It appeared that Grant had taken his dead father's hand that was covered in his own blood. He had cleaned off his finger, cleaned the blood off his finger, and then had used his father's dead finger to open his phone and access his online banking app, and then transferred a bunch of money to himself. You can't even make this shit up. He then left the home. He drove to a nearby business where he could get on Wi-Fi, and he immediately tried to contact Sylvie. This is right after murdering his entire family. Well, except for Jason, but you know what I mean? Like, the prosecutor said of this, of him like killing them and immediately leaving and trying to go and talk to Sylvie, he said of this, and I quote, "His parents' and brother's bodies aren't even cold, and he's already reestablishing or trying to reestablish contact with Sylvie. He was just waiting for her to say, 'I love you too. Come to Bulgaria. Come see me.' But that didn't happen, and that's why we're here." The prosecution believed that he was planning to run. He was planning to get on a plane. He was planning to go to another country, likely Bulgaria, to be with Sylvie. And when he was arrested, his passport was found on him. He had it. There was something happening there, allegedly. Basically, the prosecution's position throughout the trial was that Grant had killed his family and then tried to stage it to look like a murder-suicide, that Cody had killed his parents and then killed himself. And that's why so much was weird at the scene. That's why it looked staged, why the bodies were moved, why a gun and bullets were placed near Cody's body, even though it was easily proven that this gun wasn't the murder weapon and the bullets had never been fired. And speaking of the murder weapon, because we haven't even talked about that, it was never found. The murder weapon is believed to have been a gun that belonged to Cody and Grant's friend Blake. And that's because Blake testified at trial that he remembered, like after the murders happened, he remembered that about 2 weeks before the murders, Grant had been alone in his room where the gun was stored, and that after that the gun was just missing. But the defense thought that this was kind of bullshit. They thought that it was very convenient that all of a sudden Blake just remembered this months later, because he didn't come forward with it right away, I guess, and that all of a sudden he was remembering this because it would help the prosecution. And the defense said of this and of Blake, and I quote, "Blake, with his incredible sense of timing, testifies, 'I think Grant stole my gun back in January. That's going to help the state, isn't it?' He wants to help the state produce a gun, an imaginary gun." The defense's position was basically just trying to give juries any reasonable doubt to hang their hat on. They said that there was no physical evidence. There was no physical evidence that Grant had committed these murders, which was true. He said that basically the police could have processed the scene better from day one. They could have done more to investigate, but that they had tunnel vision on Grant, so they didn't look at any other suspects, but that there was no physical evidence to prove that Grant had done it. They even went out on a limb and tried to say that the family might have been killed because of drugs, because when the house was searched, they found like weed and like growing equipment in the master bedroom, I think in the closet. But it was pretty apparent that like the operation wasn't like a big scale operation. This was clearly just for like personal use, but they were really just like throwing it at the wall and seeing what stuck. Speaking of throwing things against the wall to see what stuck, well, actually this wouldn't really be that. This would be more like grasping at straws, okay? Grant's attorneys tried to have two very important pieces of evidence not admissible at trial. This was Sylvie and the money that Grant had stolen to speak to Sylvie. They were like, this is not important. You need to not put this in there. Basically what they said is that this, quote, qualified as inadmissible bad character evidence. They were like, basically this makes our guy look real bad. Can you please not put it in here? It's going to make people think badly of him right from the jump. They also wanted to omit the fact that Grant was fired from his nursing job and keep the like sex addiction, internet addiction thing out of the testimony as well. Like the jury didn't need to know any of that stuff. It doesn't apply. That context is not important, okay? No, that's not what I'm saying. That's what they were saying. This didn't happen though. Obviously all of this was admitted at trial, and Sylvie was definitely discussed at trial. They showed a lot of Sylvie. They ended up showing over 600 photos of Sylvie to the court in various stages of undress, okay? And like the Christmas cards, they showed everything. And while photos of Sylvie, you know, across the screen, Grant was completely transfixed by her. And it was apparent to those in the court. The prosecution said of Grant's obsession with Sylvie, and I quote, "Grant fell in love with a woman named Sylvie. Not only did he fall in love with her, he became obsessed with her, to the point that she's all that mattered." This trial was very sad, as I'm sure you can imagine. Jason testified for the prosecution, so against Grant, and he was really emotional during his testimony. He broke down a few times. Grant was fine, unemotional. He was silent, stoic during all of the proceedings. He didn't really show much emotion at all, except for when the medical examiner like showed the photos of his family's bodies and explained their injuries. He did get emotional during that portion, but that was pretty much it. And he never testified on his own behalf, so he never really did explain himself. Not that he would, because he was claiming that he was innocent, but nobody ever got to hear anything from his lips about what happened. So the prosecution was trying to convince the jury to give Grant the death penalty. They said that these murders were cold, calculated, just really, like, he's a fucked up person to do what he had done. And the defense tried to convince them not to give him the death penalty, not to, you know what I mean? Like, he's not guilty, don't kill him. And they gave like a list of reasons as to why they thought Grant should not get the death penalty. His age, his lack of a prior criminal record, the fact that he was a Christian, which hardly matters. And the thing that really gets to me and really, really bothers me is them saying that he shouldn't get the death penalty because he was a really good brother and a best friend to Cody. I feel like if I roll my eyes any harder, they're going to shoot out of my face. Like, I'm going to detach them and they're going to shoot right on the screen and you're going to be like, whoa, that was a lot. And then that's going to be that. Like, it's so frustrating. That part makes me so mad. Like, so fucking mad. In order for Grant to get the death penalty, the jury would have to vote unanimously to to make that be his fate. And in the end, they weren't able to do that. They weren't able to get everybody to agree that this is what should happen to him. So instead, Grant Amato was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And when the verdict was read, there was gasps in the courtroom. Family members hugged each other, friends hugged each other. It was just a really emotional moment, as I'm sure you can imagine. And the prosecutor said of the verdict, and I quote, "It's very difficult to get 12 people to agree to impose the death penalty. It's a very difficult decision to do." After the verdict, Grant's attorney was just basically like, we did the best we could with what we had. Their case was entirely circumstantial, but strong, and basically getting him out of the death penalty was the best we could do here. And he said specifically of this, and I quote, "Saving our client's life, that's the so-called prize in all of this. And finally, our heart goes out to Jason Amato. This has to be devastating for him." And this was devastating for him. This was devastating for the whole family. They all believed right from the beginning that it was Grant. And that's got to be a really hard thing to know. To like know immediately that someone you loved could do this. His brother, from day one, pleaded with him for answers. His aunt believed that he had killed them for money. Even his grandma believed that he had murdered his parents. His grandma said specifically of this, and I quote, "That kid did it. Grant killed them. Get rid of those people and I'll be free." And that's grandma. That's grandma talking. They knew, right? They clearly knew he did it, but they couldn't understand. They particularly couldn't understand how he could do this to Cody. Like, him and Cody were close. They were best friends. They did everything together. They wanted to like have the same life and just be like bros forever, right? And like they even said Cody would have spent every single dollar to his name to help Grant. And he murdered him. And he not only murdered him, but he tried to frame him for the murders of his parents. Like, it's just so fucked up. So as I said, Grant wasn't very emotional during the trial, but apparently the victim impact statements did get to him a little bit, particularly his brother Jason's. Jason was very emotional. Like, he lost his entire family. And he talked about how hard that had been. And he particularly said it was hard not talking to his mother. Because as I said, he talked to her every week. And at the time that he gave this victim impact statement, he said it had been 208 days since he had last talked to his mom. That note gets me a little bit. He just said that, like, it had been almost a year since he had heard her voice, like half a year since he had heard her voice. And that's like, And he said that even though they were gone, he wanted everybody to know that his parents and his brother were amazing people. And that he still loved his brother Grant in spite of himself. Grant has maintained his innocence ever since being convicted. And he did actually try to appeal his conviction in 2019 based on what his attorney calls, quote, several factors, including what they call speculative digital forensic evidence, which was, I think, about Cody's cell phone trying to be wiped after the murders. They didn't really believe that it could be proven that that's what was happening. And they had criticism over what was allowed and what could be argued during jury selection. And also they had a problem with a theory being able to be introduced on the murder weapon on it being Blake's, but there was no proof that it was. His team also argued that there was no physical evidence, which they already said, and that the police had tunnel vision. They believed that they had grounds for the appeal and that it would be successful and they would be able to try this case again. Now, these things can take time, right? Appeals can take a long time, and at the time I'm filming this, I don't see an update on that, but I'm curious, like, what do you think? Do you think he deserves a new trial? Like, I know emotionally we want to be like, no, fuck that guy. He definitely doesn't deserve a new trial. He killed his parents, right? But legally speaking, do you think he deserves a new trial? I just don't know. It's tough. I have such hard times, and I know a lot of people do, and it's just like a fully circumstantial case on how I feel, because circumstantial evidence is evidence, and it does matter, and it can paint a pretty compelling paint a compelling picture, right? And it did in this case, but I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I know how I feel emotionally. I don't know how I feel logically. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, as far as Sylvie goes, because I'm sure some of you are curious, like, what the fuck happened with Sylvie? Well, it appears from what I can see that she's still working. I was able to go online and I found her new, website, and it seems like she's still working as a cam girl, and she's going under a new name of Addie Sweets, and I, went into her room, and that's how I was able to kind of figure out how, cam girl things work. I was able to see her pictures and her menu and all that jazz, and it seems like she's still working. I can't even imagine. Can you imagine how weird it is for her? To know that she was connected to something like this, and to know everything he did, and he did it because he's, obsessed with her. She has to know, right? I guess it's possible she doesn't know. I didn't see anything that confirmed one way or the other if police, spoke to her and if they told her what happened. I actually saw stuff that said they didn't, which seems crazy to me. I didn't see it confirmed one way or the other. But that's got to be like, she has to know, right? Yeah, she has to know. That's probably why she changed her name, right? To separate herself from the weird little man who literally killed for her. And with that said, that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Chad, Margaret, and Cody Amato at the hands of their own son and brother, Grant Amato. Isn't that just so crazy, dude? It's so, I'm often, even though I talk about this every week and I look into this stuff every single day, it still blows my mind sometimes what people do and why. It just seems so like stupid. Like, literally, Sylvie was just doing her job, giving the fantasy, and he fell in love. He definitely wears a shirt that says school. Like, okay, that's a John Mulaney joke. That might be too deep of a cut. I'm just trying to like lighten the mood because like that was just so much. Like, I really went down a rabbit hole with this. I really went deep. I saw the crime scene photos. It was just a lot. It's just so stupid. He killed his whole family for nothing. For what? For money? For a woman who only pretended to like you because you literally paid her to do so. Idiot. Gross, grubby Grant Amato. Like, ugh. And now, considering all the information I've given you on this case, I want you to answer the question of the day. Do you think Grant Amato killed his family due to rage for them outing him to Sylvie and effectively ending their relationship? Or do you think he killed them to gain monetarily from them, to fuel this obsession? And additionally, I have another question, because this is something I kind of touched on but didn't get into. Do you think he was trying to stage a murder-suicide? Because here's my thought. I kind of think that he wasn't. I wasn't there. I didn't look at the evidence. Just based on what I read, I almost think that he tried to make it look like Cody and Chad shot each other. Not that Cody shot them and then killed himself. Because why, if he was trying to stage it like Cody killed them both and then killed himself, would he even bother to put the holstering gun on his dad? Like, that part doesn't make sense to me at all. I just don't get it. So let me know what you think down below. Today we're going to be discussing the horrible double murder of Alan and Diane Johnson, committed at the hands of their own 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Marie Johnson. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. Now, this is a video on a case that was suggested to me by a subscriber named Shani, or Chani, C-H-A-N-I. So thank you, Chani, for your suggestion. And wow, wow, wow. Woey, woey. I had never heard of this case before, and it was very interesting to look into. So this is a case of parricide, which is when a child kills their parents. And I did not realize that this was like a super rare thing. We do hear about it from time to time. I've covered a couple of cases like this, but the reason you've heard of the cases that you've heard of is because it is so rare that when it happens, people are like, what the fuck? Because of overall murders across the board, parricides make up a super small percentage. And parricides committed by underage females, like Sarah Marie Johnson, almost non-existent. Because of that, it was a very interesting case to dive into. I read so many things. I watched so many things. And I just kept diving in. There was something about it. I could not seem to consume enough. So now my head is swollen with information on this case. And I guess I did the work, so now you don't have to. You can sit back. You can pop your feet up. Keep them elevated. Because that's good for you. When you're pregnant. And you can sit back and hear about this horrendous crime I'm going to tell you about today. With all that said, I guess it's time that I stop talking about it and start being about it, or start talking about what I said I'm going to talk about. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrible double murder of Alan and Diane Johnson by their 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Marie Johnson. Okay, now where do we begin? I guess we can begin in 2003, because that's where our story takes place. Duh. And up until this year, 46-year-old Alan Johnson and his 52-year-old wife, Diane Johnson, had been living a pretty sweet life. The two had been together for 20 years. They were part-time lovers and full-time friends, if you know what I mean, and they had created a really good life together. Alan was part owner of a landscaping company, and Diane worked for a medical clinic, and the couple made a comfortable living for their family with a nice house on a spacious 2-acre parcel of land on the outskirts of Sun Valley, Idaho, a very bougie area where most people came to vacation, and only the ones with like dollar bills, y'all, could afford to actually live. So they were doing good. They were comfortable. Both Diane and Alan were well known in their community, and they were known for being like really rad people. They were friendly. They often had parties. They had a lot of friends within their community. Diane was described as vivacious and curious, loyal and friendly. She was said to be the exact type of friend anyone would be lucky to have, and she was married to Alan, the man of men, the type of guy all other men admired and respected and looked up to. And he was described as just being an honest and straightforward dude. And the couple as a unit were known as being just really great parents to their 2 children. First was the couple's son. His name was Matt, and at the time that this happened, he was 22 years old, and he was away at college, living away at college at this time. And when he was interviewed after the fact, he said his parents were just really awesome, that they were each other's best friend, which is exactly what you would want, I imagine, in parents, is to have your mom and dad be best friends with each other because they loved each other so much. And he said that he and his dad were super close, that when he still lived in the house, they did everything together, and that he described his mom as the type of woman who could literally make anyone smile. So these people just sounded like they were pretty awesome people. And their second child was a daughter who was 16 at the time. This was Sarah Marie Johnson, and Sarah and her brother Matt were very, very close growing up. They had a good life. Sarah Marie Johnson was born January 24th, 1987, and she grew up in Bellevue, Idaho, and attended Wood River High School. Growing up, she was a little bit of a tomboy. She especially loved to attend the gun range to practice her shooting skills with her father, because she was said to be a bit of a daddy's girl, and daddy was into shooting guns, so daddy's girl was into shooting guns. She was academically inclined with dreams of being a teacher one day, and she was very athletic as well. She played basketball and volleyball and was even on the debate team because she had a brain on her. She was popular and she was well liked, and from at least the outside point of view, it seemed like she had a pretty sweet gig, she had a wonderful life, right? It seems like they all did. Now, this all changed just after Labor Day weekend in 2003, and this is when both Alan and Diane were brutally murdered in their own home. So sometime just after 6 a.m., Diane, who was still in bed, all covered up, snug as a bug in a rug, was shot in the head with a rifle and murdered. And her husband, Alan, who had been in the shower, was shot in the chest while he was still in the shower, and the bullet went through his chest and hit the bathroom wall behind him. He was either just getting out of the shower or just in, shower door was open, he was getting out. He was shot in the chest, it went through him and hit the wall behind him. Diane was said to have died instantly. Her head wound was very intense. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And Alan was still alive when he was first shot because he made it from the bathroom and walked into the room a little bit, probably trying to get to his wife, and ended up collapsing on the floor where he bled to death. The couple's daughter, Sarah, who was the only other person home at the time, ran from the house in pure terror, and she ran to a neighbor's home where she called the police. And when police arrived, they went into the home and they found the whole bloody scene. It was described as one of the worst scenes that any of these officers had ever seen. And when they went in, Diane was found deceased still in her bed, and Alan was found deceased on the floor of the bedroom. When police initially arrived, they thought that they were looking at a murder-suicide because, again, this was one of the worst scenes that they had ever seen, and they couldn't really think of any other explanation. But once they looked at where the bodies were located and the proximity of the murder weapon, the rifle, to the bodies, they realized that this just simply couldn't be the case and it had to be a murder. And when they searched the scene, they also found a bunch of knives, like not a bunch, I think there were 3 knives in the bedroom at the murder scene. But this was very weird because neither victim had sustained any sort of, nobody had been stabbed. So they were like, what are these knives here for, bro? I really don't know. And it gets explained a little bit later, maybe. But at the time, they were just like, this is a really fucking weird crime scene. I don't know what I'm looking at here. So police immediately shut shit down. They knew like they needed to close off the scene, and they closed off the streets so that nobody could be driving in and out. And this ended up being a really good call on their part because there was a trash truck. There's a trash truck, my God. Baby brain. There was a trash truck that was going down the street that was going to be going to the Johnson's house next. So they stopped all in and out traffic, which ended up being good because there was key evidence found in the Johnson's trash can that was out on the curb, ready for trash day, that ended up being useful in the case. Inside this trash can, they found a bloody, like a blood-spattered pink bathrobe. They also found a left-handed leather glove and a right-handed, like, doctor glove? What is that? Latex glove. Latex glove. And all of these items had someone's DNA on them. Inside this trash can, they also found bullets that were determined to have belonged to the murder weapon, so that was something very useful. And they also found a pregnancy test that was a bit odd. When they searched the home, they found the leather glove, his mate, just like this one, but opposite, not an evil twin, but, you know, the opposite leather glove, in Sarah's bedroom. They also found the rifle, the murder weapon, in the master bedroom. And when Sarah was searched, like looked at, spoken to, they found that she had a pretty gnarly bruise on her shoulder that developed because of what they believe was the recoil from the rifle. So when police questioned Sarah, because obviously they're going to question Sarah, she's the only one there at the time, she says that what happened was that she was in her room when she could hear like the shower running and things going on in the house because it was like early in the morning and she was waking up, when all of a sudden she heard a loud bang. She said that at that she got up and she like went to her parents' bedroom door that was closed and she kind of like knocked on the door, like called out to her mom and dad before she heard another loud bang and got horrified, so she ran from the house to go to her neighbors. So police ended up asking Sarah about the pink bathrobe because when they looked, the one that was found in the trash can outside covered in blood, because when they looked at it, they were like, this definitely looks like it would belong to like a 16-year-old girl. And who are we questioning right now? But a 16-year-old girl. So they asked her about the robe, like if it belonged to her, etc., etc. And her response, which they found to be very odd, was, I didn't kill my parents. And they were like, thank you for that information. Not really what we asked, but thank you for divulging that out of nowhere. So they were definitely a little bit suspicious of her, and that was like a red flag that they took note of, but they weren't immediately thinking that Sarah was the trigger man. They were interested in a couple of other people. First was a housekeeper that Sarah had told police had recently been let go, had been fired because her parents discovered this person was stealing from them. And another was a 19-year-old man named Bruno Santos. And the reason that police were suspecting him is because when they were interviewing people, interviewing members of the family, a lot of them said that they thought Bruno Santos could have been the guilty party. Now, who was Bruno Santos? And how was he connected to this case at all? If he was. How was he connected to this family? 19-year-old Bruno Santos was 16-year-old Sarah's new boyfriend. The two had been dating for about 3 months at the time of the murders, and her parents were not about it. Bruno was an illegal immigrant from Mexico, which I'd like to believe was not the reason for their disapproval, but it is mentioned like a ton when you look into this case. But what I personally think was a big reason that they weren't into him were a couple of other things. One, the age difference. Bruno was 19 years old, so there's a 3-year difference between him and their underage daughter's age. And he was known as being a bit of a bad boy who exclusively liked younger girls, which they were not about. They were like, maybe we don't do that. Maybe we don't fuck with that. The next reason that I think was an issue for them, because they were more of an elite, well-off and educated family, was that Bruno was a high school dropout from a less financially elite side of town. And the next reason is that he was known as being a bit of a drug dealer. So those were a couple of things that I think her parents were just like not really about. The relationship between Sarah and Bruno was a big point of contention in the Johnson household because they did not approve of him. They weren't quiet about how they felt. And it caused a lot of fights, a lot of arguments through the entirety of their relationship because, people just were not down with the Bruno Santos sickness, and they weren't quiet about it, and nobody thought that she should be dating him. And it wasn't just Sarah's family. Even her friends were like, maybe we don't. One of her friends was interviewed. This is a girl named Syringa Stark. And she said of Sarah and Bruno's relationship, and I quote, "I just felt like she could do better. He was a high school dropout and was selling drugs, and she was from a nice family." It just didn't seem like it was right. But Bruno and Sarah were seemingly happy and seemingly in love. Sarah even showed her friends engagement rings that the two had bought together and openly discussed that the two were banging. So, ain't nobody want to see them together, but it don't matter now. Because I got you, babe. That's the vibe that they were putting out into the world. So, apparently things came to a head with all this relationship drama just before Labor Day weekend. And this was when Sarah had told her family she was going to be spending the night at a girlfriend's house. And they were like, cool, that's great, go have fun. But then sometime in the night, Sarah's mom, who I imagine probably suspected that her daughter was not at her girlfriend's house, called over to the girlfriend's home. Like, ring, ring, ring. Hello, yes, can I speak to my daughter Sarah? And they were like, yeah, she's not here. She said she was lying. And they were like, fucking knew it. Like, I knew it. I knew she was lying. So they suspected that she was probably with Bruno Santos, which in their minds was not good. And lying to your parents and staying somewhere other than where you say you're going to be is not a cool thing to do. Don't do it. It's not safe and it's not respectful. That's that on that. So they decide that they're going to go and catch her, and they decide they're going to mob on over to Bruno's home. So it's actually Sarah's dad, Alan, and Sarah's uncle who drive on over to Bruno's house. When they get there, they knock on the door and they find that Sarah is there. And Alan's fucking pissed. He's super upset about it, and he confronts Bruno and is yelling right in Bruno's face. I don't know if he's yelling or if he's speaking sternly like a papa. I wasn't there. But basically what the conversation was like, you, sir, who are an adult, need to stay away from my daughter. Like, that's it. This is it. Like, this is done. If you do not, I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to let them know that you're having sex with an underage girl, and I'm going to have you deported back to Mexico. He wasn't playing around. And Sarah's uncle, who was present during this conversation, said of this whole situation, and I quote, he was completely disgusted, as anyone would be when they find out their kid is doing something stupid. But though Alan made threats of calling the police, he never actually did it. And this was on Saturday. And by Tuesday, Alan would be murdered in what the county sheriff called one of the most horrifying and brutal crime scenes that they had ever seen. To illustrate how bad this was, the defense attorney said later at the trial of this crime scene, and I quote, there was blood and hair on the carpet. It was on the ceiling. It was on the walls. There was part of a skull cap in the hallway. After leaving Bruno's house that night, Alan let Jessica, don't know who that is, there's no one in this case named Jessica, Alan let Sarah know that she was grounded indefinitely. He took away her house keys and he told her that she was to stay in the guest house on the property. They had like a back house that was rented out to a tenant, but the tenant, who I guess they must have been friends with, because like if I was a tenant and my landlord did what they're about to do, I'd be like, what the fuck? But he told her to go stay in the guest house while the tenant was away. And that's all she could do was just stay there and be there. And Sarah was surprisingly okay with this. She was mad. It was clear that she was upset, but she didn't yell, she didn't scream, she didn't fight it. She was just like, okay, cool. And went and stayed in the guest house. And this was unusual for her because her brother said that everything with her was an explosive fight. Like anytime she didn't get her way, it was like she was trying to stomp her feet through the ground during fights. And this time she was cool as a cucumber. Now, back to the scene after the murder. So Matt, the son, had been away at college when this happened. And as soon as he heard that something had happened, he hurried home. And he arrived to find a hearse parked at his family's house. That's what he came home to, was a hearse taking away the murdered bodies of his parents. And he was just traumatized. And at first he was like wondering if maybe it was just a dream, if it was just like a really bad dream. But then he was enveloped in a circle of hugs from his family members who had already gotten there and were waiting for him. And he was like, oh fuck, like this is real life. And he, like a lot of the other family members who were there, were already feeling like and discussing the fact that they thought that Bruno Santos was involved. In their minds, they were like, why else would this have happened? Why would they be murdered right after having this fight? Why would Sarah have been spared if this wasn't Bruno? And he must have just been super pissed because Alan and Diane were not going to let him and Sarah be together, and they were threatening to deport him, so he took care of his problem. So as the family gathers and more members of the family, more friends show up at the house and start talking, they're all talking about Bruno. And everyone that police talk to, they're talking about Bruno. So police are very interested in this Bruno Santos, and they are convinced that his DNA is going to be a match for the items that have been found in the trash can in front of the family's home. So the police on the scene actually send a team out to try to locate Bruno so they can question him. Where you been? What you doing? All that jazz. But while they're at the crime scene, who shows up? I feel like this has happened recently in a couple cases that I've done, where they like want to question somebody and then the person they want to question just shows up. So he shows up at the crime scene. They're like, hey, Bruno, just who we've been looking for. Can you do me a favor? And can you hang out a bit? Let's talk. Let's rap. I'd love to know your alibi. I would love to take your DNA. That'd be great. So they get a warrant for his DNA. They take it. They test it. And to everyone's surprise, Bruno is not a match for the DNA found in the trash can. His DNA is not found anywhere at this crime scene. And he has an alibi for the time of the murders. Oh, and just for the record, the housekeeper that Sarah had initially said could have been disgruntled, the one that was fired for stealing, and the tenant who lived in the back house, both end up being ruled out as suspects. I don't get into them a lot in this because it hardly matters. But do remember the tenant in the guest house, because he does come back in a little bit, but they both were ruled out as possible suspects in the murder. So while police are still kind of focusing on Bruno, her friends and family, Sarah's friends and family, start to notice something odd with Sarah in the way she is acting. And police notice this too. So Sarah seemed to people who knew her like she was putting on an act, like she was hamming it up and seeming sadder than she actually was. And it rubbed people the wrong way. There was one instance where Sarah was hugging her grandma and crying and rubbing her back. And then she sees a friend of hers show up at the scene. And she calls the friend over, and as soon as the friend walks over, it's like the tears completely shut off. And she whispers in this friend's ear, and what she whispers is to please go check on Bruno. And a couple members of her family caught this interaction and found it very odd. And the friend who she had whispered to, this was a girl named Megan. Megan thought it was odd too. And she later said of this moment at trial, and I quote, "On the day of the murders, when she was hugging her grandma Pat, she mouthed to me to go check if Bruno was okay." And the thing that Sarah did that put investigators sort of on edge is that when they were wheeling Alan and Diane's bodies out of the house, Sarah seemed completely unaffected. She was cold and she was distant. She just sat on a wall and watched them wheel the murdered bodies of her parents out of the house. The one, she had just been in the home, supposedly, when this happened, and she should have been traumatized, right? That's what people would have expected. I know you can't really say how people are going to act in a situation like this, but the way she acted, just watching them wheel by with no issue whatsoever, definitely stuck out to investigators. One of the officers on scene said of this moment, and I quote, "I said, there's something going on here. I mean, most 16-year-olds would be hiding. They would not want to sit there on a fence and watch their parents come out in body bags. No way." After talking to family more, and after talking to people who knew Sarah and her parents more, and learning about the heated arguments that they would have, and how often things got to be explosive between Sarah and her parents, particularly when discussing Bruno, they started to wonder if maybe Sarah could have been involved in these murders. So they end up bringing her in, and they take her fingerprints, they take her DNA, and they question her. And even though there was no sign of a break-in, there was no forced entry, and even though both of her parents had taken out some pretty good life insurance policies on themselves, which would have left their children, Sarah included, pretty comfortable, Sarah denied everything. She denied any involvement. She completely stuck to the story that an intruder had come into her home and had murdered her parents. But at this point, police were like, see what we think happened? They didn't say this to her, but this is what was going through their heads. They're like, well, what we actually think is that you, Sarah, murdered your parents in a fit of rage after they told you couldn't see Bruno anymore and threatened to have him deported. You felt like your relationship was in jeopardy, so you murdered them, and you were hoping to get that life insurance money and then to just run off into the sunset with your boyfriend with no repercussions. Police believed this, but they didn't have proof yet. They didn't have enough to arrest her. So since they couldn't arrest her and she was newly orphaned, she was sent to live with her aunt and uncle, which I believe was her mom's sister and her mom's sister's boyfriend, husband. They were married. And this was weird for them because by this time, Sarah's family, a lot of her family members are starting to wonder if she's guilty as well, because they're seeing everything that comes out seems to point to her. They know that it wasn't Bruno, and they don't have a lot of other people to suspect. So these people bring Sarah into their home, even though they believe it's possible that she's a murderer. So they believe that they have a killer under their roof while they sleep at night. Her aunt, who let her live with her, said of this suspicion, and I quote, "Every time she went in to be interrogated by police, her story kept changing." And this was true. Her story did keep changing. She would change little details like what she was doing when she heard the gunshots, whether she was asleep or not, because first she heard the shower, then she was asleep, but when she heard the first shot, she told police that she had gotten up to run to check her parents' bedroom, but that when she left her room, she closed her door and she didn't go back in there. But when they searched the home, they found that her mother's blood, Sarah's mother's blood, Diane's blood, had spattered into Sarah's room. There was blood in Sarah's room, but if she had closed the door and not gone back in there, how could this have happened? It was just a lot of little things that were making people suspicious because they thought these are things that you should remember. And when police would bring these inconsistencies to her attention, she would stick to her story and she'd have no explanation for them. And she also just didn't seem to be affected or traumatized by what happened, and people found this to be incredibly odd. And her aunt that she had stayed with said of this also, and I quote, "When we would be discussing Alan and Diane, and someone would get upset, she would roll her eyes and act disgusted." This girl, it's like if you did this, you would think you would try to hide it better, but she just really didn't. She just didn't give a fuck, man. Like apparently even at her parents' memorial service, right? She was there and she wasn't acting sad, she wasn't crying, and she had even asked if she could like leave to go to a volleyball game afterwards. Like that's what she wanted to do immediately after the funeral of her parents. And her aunt had even overheard her the day of the funeral. She was like going to get her hair and her nails done for the service, and she overheard Sarah telling somebody who worked there that she just wanted to, quote, get on with her life. So all of these little things were just rubbing people the wrong way and putting a bad taste in their mouth. Oh my God, I almost forgot. The dream. The dream. Okay, so Sarah had a weird dream while she was staying with her aunt and her uncle. And she divulged this dream to her aunt, and her aunt talked about it at trial. And I think this dream is incredibly creepy and incredibly telling. And let me know if you agree. I almost forgot about this, and I cannot believe I almost forgot about this, because this was like very like to me, and I think it will be to you as well. Sarah told her aunt that she had a dream that she was walking up to her aunt and uncle's house, but once she went through the door, she was in the home that she had shared with her parents. And she said her mom and dad were there, but that when she looked at her mom's face wasn't there. It was like the area where her face would have been was like digitally blocked out. Okay? Her mom suffered a head wound. She said her father was also there, and that he had the same thing with his chest, that his chest was digitally blocked out. He was shot in the chest. And apparently she did not see these injuries because remember, she ran out of the house when she heard the shots. So she's having a dream about this. She said that in her dream she wanted to hug her dad, but that she couldn't do it because she didn't want to hurt him. And that in response he said to her, and I quote, "You can't hurt me anymore." Does that not make the hair on the back of your arms, the back of your neck, the back of where the fuck ever just like stand up on end? Is that not such a creepy dream? Sir? Ma'am? No. So it wasn't just Sarah's family that was starting to be suspicious of her. Her friends were starting to be suspicious of her as well. They would kind of look at the situation. They'd look at how she'd act. She'd be acting though. And they'd be like, this seems a little bit suspicious. Like the fact that she was more preoccupied with hanging out with friends, hanging out with Bruno, with getting her hair done and her nails done in what should have been like intense grief. And they found it to be odd. And one friend in particular had a very weird interaction with her that made her feel like, oh fuck, this girl is guilty. And this was an interaction that she had with a friend named Shanti. Shanti. Wait a minute. Wasn't that the name of our subscriber who suggested this case? Wait, hold a minute. Let me go through my notes here. Wait a minute. Okay, no. Our subscriber suggestion's name was Shani, C-H-A-N-I, and the friend is C-H-A-N-T-E. But I was like, what? For a minute, I was like, are we speaking to somebody who knew this girl? Because that would have been very cool to know. We are not. Moving on. Anyways, this girl, Shanti, said of a moment that she and Shara shared after a volleyball game that happened after the murders, and I quote, "She came up to me and said, 'Shanti, please find Bruno and tell him I love him no matter what happens.'" Shanti said at that moment that her heart just dropped and that she knew that Sarah was responsible for her parents' murder. She said she couldn't believe that Sarah would be more concerned with Bruno and his feelings and of seeing him and things like that than she was about her parents being murdered and somebody not being caught for it yet. Like, she didn't seem to be curious about who might have done that at all because allegedly she knew. And she also told Shanti that, like, she couldn't call her and she couldn't call Bruno herself because she was under surveillance, and she thought this was odd too because she's like, what do you have to hide? Like, why can't you have these conversations? So while all this is happening, police are still diligently working on putting the case together. They're looking at everything they have. They're looking at the evidence they have, how it fits together, if it fits with the idea that Sarah is the culprit, etc., etc. What they had was the bullets that they found in the trash can, the robe that was covered in blood and belonged to Sarah that was determined to have gunshot residue inside the right sleeve, the 2 gloves, both that contained DNA that was in the process of being tested, a pair of wool socks that were taken from Sarah the day of the murders that had blood on the bottoms, live bullets determined to also be from the murder weapon that were found inside Sarah's room, and the murder weapon itself that was a .264 Winchester Magnum rifle. And it was determined that this gun belonged to the tenant who lived in the guest house. Now remember, this tenant, though this gun belonged to him, he was determined to have had an alibi and to not have even been in the area. He was like in a totally different area at the time these murders occurred. But also remember that after Sarah got in a fight with her parents when they confronted Bruno, where was Sarah sent to stay? In the guest house, where this gun was kept, so she did have access. Now, police got their first big break in this case when the lab called the police and were like, yo, Mr. Policeman, we have a match for that DNA that was found on that pink robe and also those 2 gloves that you pulled from the trash can. And they were like, oh my God, that's great. Who is it? Like, they knew, but they were like, but who is it? We don't know who is it. And the lab guy was like, well, it is none other than Sarah Marie Johnson. And they were like, fuck yeah, this is awesome. And one of the investigators said of this moment and getting this realization, this confirmation, and I quote, "When the state lab came back and they said we have Sarah's DNA inside the glove, we said, there it is. We got her." Which I will say it does sound a little tunnel vision-y. Like, they seemed like they wanted her, right? But it also seems like all the stuff was pointing towards her and this was just confirming what they believed to be true. But I will acknowledge that it does feel a little tunnel vision-y. But I also think she did it and I think they proved it. So it's like, I don't know how to feel. This was very hard on Sarah's family, as I'm sure you can imagine. When her grandfather asked police, like, who was the person who pulled the trigger, if not Bruno, and they told him that it was Sarah, it was a crushing realization because the family had been suspecting her, right? They had had a feeling that she was responsible, but of course they were hoping that that was not the case. And now they had confirmation that yes, this was the case. Even her own brother had started to be like, oh, fuck, I think it might be her. But they weren't sure. They didn't have that, like, proof that it was her. And now they did. And that realization, that realness, it just had to have been soul-crushing. I cannot even imagine being in that situation. And her grandmother said of this realization, and I quote, "It takes a lot of evidence to convince a grandma that her granddaughter killed her daughter. I mean, it had to be overwhelming." So police now believe they have enough to arrest Sarah, but they want a confession. They want that little bit more. So they decide to take one more stab at her and to try to confront her with everything they have to get her to confess to the crime. So they bring her in and they question her and they interrogate her and they interrogate her. And after 45 minutes, it's very clear to them that they're not going to break her. So they make the decision to arrest the 16-year-old teenager, which must have been just such a weird thing. Like, to arrest a kid for a double murder, that's got to be super weird. Weird or not, though, Sarah Marie Johnson was arrested on October 30th, 2003, nearly 2 months after her parents were killed, and she was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, which was punishable by 10 years to life in prison or by death. She was held with a $2 million bail, and she was being tried as an adult, and she pled not guilty to both counts. Sarah's arrest made headlines everywhere. The fact that a teenage girl murdered both her parents in such an intense way was such an unheard of thing, that it blew everybody's minds. As I said in the beginning of this video, it's called parricide, and it's very rare. And typically, if it happens at all, it's not committed by daughters, it's committed by sons, and it's usually people who are older. But in this case, it was a girl and an underage girl, and that is crazy. That's like something that just hardly ever happens. And if it does happen, more often than not, the girl will implore. She'll get a guy to help her do it. She'll get a boyfriend, a guy who really likes her, somebody else to do the dirty work for her. But her being the person who actually pulled the trigger was insane for people, and they couldn't wrap their minds around it. They were like, how did this girl from this well-off family with no history of mental illness, no abuse, nothing going on in her family, how did she go to such an extreme? It just didn't make sense to anybody, and they could not wrap their heads around that this was real. It was like very hard for them to believe. So the prosecution had their work cut out for them because it didn't compute. The trial ended up being a bit of a circus too, because they ended up having to move venues because it was thought that Sarah would not get a fair trial if they stayed at the courthouse in their area. And that ended up being true, because when they were like looking at prospective jurors in Blaine County, a ton of them ended up getting disqualified because they either knew Diane and Alan too well, or knew Sarah too well, or knew the case too well. The trial finally did begin in February of 2005, and the prosecution was feeling confident that they had enough physical evidence to convict Sarah, but they were not confident that they'd be able to convince a jury that this bright, charismatic, athletic, well-liked, popular girl from an affluent neighborhood with a good life and a good family could just so easily flip the switch and become such an intense, aggressive, brutal, ruthless murderer. They did not feel confident they were going to be able to convince some normal thinking human beings that this could have been possible. The prosecution did believe, though, and painted a picture for the jury of a girl, Sarah, who was fucking pissed. She was mad at her parents. She was pissed at her parents for interfering in her relationship for the last time. Her relationship of 3 months, mind you, like so stupid, but that she was pissed. And that when her dad threatened to have Bruno deported, she got even more mad because she thought that this might actually happen and her relationship was threatened. And while she was in that guest house, she saw that rifle that belonged to the tenant, and she started thinking like, that could be useful. And she started putting a plan together in her head, a plan where she would ruthlessly murder both of her parents, get the life insurance money, and then run into the sunset free to marry Bruno Santos without incident. To strengthen this theory, at trial, the prosecution talked about how Sarah and Bruno were engaged to be married. And prior to being arrested, Sarah was asked about this and she denied it. She was like, no, we were never engaged. That wasn't a thing. So at trial, the prosecution brought up Sarah's friend Megan to testify to prove that Sarah had been lying. And Megan told the court that yes, Bruno and Sarah were engaged, that Bruno had proposed to Sarah at like a dinner that they had had for the volleyball team, and that Sarah and Bruno had even driven out to Boise to pick out their engagement rings. Like there was a plan for them to get married. And the whole time Megan testified to this, Sarah just fucking rolled her eyes into the back of her head. This trial, so the murder was already tearing this family apart, right? Like the idea that this whole family has lost 2 people that were so important to them. and the fact that somebody that they loved was on trial for doing it. But then they were further ripped apart when like members of the family had to testify against Sarah during the murder trial. So they had to make this decision on if they believed she was guilty or not, and to decide if they want to try to help her or if they want to try to get justice if they really think it's her. And it's so sad because even Sarah's brother Matt testified against his sister at trial and told them about the relationship Sarah had with his parents and about how often they would fight and what they'd fight about and how explosive it would get and how volatile it was, and how often Sarah would talk about how she just hated her mother. And that just must have been really hard for him. I can't imagine being in that situation. And then what pissed me off so much is that Sarah's attorney, the defense attorney, tried to say that the only reason that Matt was testifying against his sister, okay, was to ensure that she got arrested so that he could get the whole $500,000 life insurance policy to himself because she'd be in jail. And that's so fucked up. Sometimes defense attorneys can be ruthless sons of bitches, right? Like, you don't need to pull other people under the bus to defend your client. Like, that's so messed up. And it made me so mad to read because this guy's already going through so much. And then to have this guy say that, I was like, what a asshole. And obviously Matt was like, no, that's not it. He denied it completely. And he's like, actually, like, the real reason is because I'm just trying to get justice for my parents who were murdered. I feel like that little meme of that girl with the hairbrush. That bullshit. He ended up telling the court that his mom and his sister did not get along, that they were always rocky, especially recently, that they didn't see eye to eye, that things would get explosive, that they would fight, and that at one point things recently had gotten so bad that while they were fighting, Diane slapped her daughter in the face. And in response to that, Sarah attacked her mother, and it got so intense and so brutal that Alan had to physically break them apart. So, it sounds real not tight. It sounds like no one was having a good time. Straight up, not having a good time. Sarah's aunt also testified against her at trial, the aunt that she was living with after her parents were killed. And the prosecution asked her aunt if Sarah had ever talked about the insurance money, because the prosecution believed that she wanted the money and that was part of her motivation for committing the murders. And her aunt said that the only time she brought it up was when she was upset, and she would talk about how her brother was going to get everything and she wasn't going to get anything. Couldn't get that word out. My mouth's not working. I need some water. So there was one other person who testified against Sarah at trial who I think their testimony should be taken with a grain of salt because of who it's coming from. But I thought that it was interesting and telling and explained a couple of things, so I thought it was at least worth mentioning. Now, this person who testified against Sarah was a convicted felon. This was a woman who was in jail for drugs named Melinda Gonzalez. And she had been in jail with Sarah while Sarah awaited trial for murdering her parents. So they became friends and they would talk. And she said that Sarah was pretty open with her about her relationship with her parents, that she would talk about the fights, that she would talk about how intense they would get and how much she absolutely hated her mother. And she talked about how she was a daddy's girl, that she loved her dad, but that if both her parents were to die, she would get the whole $500,000 of the life insurance policy because her brother wasn't her dad's real son. Don't know if that's true. That could have just been made up by anybody. I don't know. It's fucked up to say, but it's what Melinda said that Sarah said. She also said that Sarah would slip up a lot about the murders, very much like she had been the one that committed them. She was pulling up. Did you ever see that interview? If you've seen my O.J. Simpson video, you would know that I talked about this in the O.J. Simpson video, but O.J. Simpson did an interview when he was talking about the book he wrote, the If I Did It book, where he would slip up a lot and be like, oh yeah, I remember, then I did this and did that. Like, he would go into that default of speaking because he fucking did it, allegedly. And Sarah would do the same thing. She would be like, oh, when the other people killed my parents, this happened. Like, she would slip up. She'd have slip-ups of the tongue often, which I found very interesting. And she also said that Sarah explained the knives that were found in the bedroom. Because you remember I said that there were some random knives that were found at the crime scene and that police were not really able to determine why they had been there since nobody had been stabbed to death. Well, Sarah said that she had them in there, that there was 3 knives, 1 knife for each member of the family, 1 for her mother, 1 for her father, and 1 for her, because she wanted the murders at first to look like a group of people had come into that house to murder her entire family. 1 for her, 1 for her mom, 1 for her dad, and that she had just gotten away. Is this true? I don't know, but I thought it was interesting. The defense, however, thought the prosecution's case was weak, which I disagree with, but they did have one point that they made a lot that did make me go, And this was that they didn't believe then, and apparently her attorney still doesn't believe that Sarah is guilty. Like, he still tried to help her for like years after she was arrested because he didn't think she had done it. And their biggest reason for this was that when Sarah ran to the neighbor's house after the murders happened, she was completely sans blood. Like, there was not a speck of blood on her body. And they did not believe that it was possible that she could have committed the type of murder she committed and not have a single drop of blood on her. He was like, not on her hair, not on her earlobes, nothing. There was nothing. And I mean, is it possible that she could have cleaned up after the fact? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how much time there was between the gunshots, like neighbors hearing shots, and her ending up at the neighbor's house. I also tend to think that if that was the case, there'd be evidence of a cleanup, like in the shower or in the sink. But even with that said, it is still sketchy that her DNA was on the robe and on the gloves, particularly the gloves. But then again, she did live in that house, so she had all the access for her DNA to be on everything. Her attorney just kept driving home the point that there was no blood, so there was no guilt. He did another OJ thing, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. If there's no blood, there's no guilt. That was his whole point. Like, there's no way she could have done this without getting blood on her, so therefore she did not do this. And he ended up saying of the crime scene, and I quote, "Her mother's head literally exploded in a spherical fashion. The gun itself had blood on it. Yet there was none on her. Absolutely none." The prosecution and the defense went back and forward on this blood thing because it is, like, definitely something worth discussing, because I would imagine that she would have blood on her too. They had like a reenactment done at one point to just show how bloody it would be, but the judge ended up saying that they couldn't show this at trial because it wasn't, I don't know exactly why they wouldn't let him show it at trial, but the judge was like, no, you're not showing this at trial. But even in my head, I would imagine with what happened to her mother's head, there would be blood on her. And the expert for the defense testified that he could not at all see a way that it would be possible for this murder to have been committed without some sort of spatter, some sort of misting being on the killer. And he said of this, and I quote, "I concluded that the shooter was in such proximity to the explosive environment that produced misted blood that he would have either had blood spatter on his person or on his items of clothing." And the defense showed many very gruesome shots of the crime scene just to illustrate how bloody and how messy this crime scene really was. And this was one of the only times during the trial, because Sarah was pretty stoic. That bitch was like locked and loaded. She was not very emotional, but during the part where they showed these photos, she did actually sob. One other thing that Sarah's defense attorney did that I thought was like, I get why he did it, but it's also a little dumb, is he tried to introduce the idea that even though Bruno didn't pull the trigger, he could have still been the mastermind behind the murders, and Sarah not be involved at all. He said because Bruno was a criminal and a drug dealer, that he could have people that were working for him that could have gone and actually committed this murder for him, right? But he chose not to put Bruno on the stand and not to question him at all, which I think weakens his theory personally, but that's just me. Before the jury was sent to deliberate, the judge asked Sarah if she would like to testify on her own behalf and tell her side of the story and try to, say whatever it was that she felt like she could say before they went in to decide if she was guilty of murdering her parents. And she just quietly was like, "No, I do not." And when she responded with "No, I do not," her family members, people sitting in the courtroom, just kind of shook their head in disbelief and probably disappointment because they just wanted to hear what she had to say for herself. After a 5-week trial, the jury was sent out to deliberate and decide if the 16-year-old Sarah Marie Johnson was guilty of murdering both of her parents. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned on March 1st, 2005, ready to give their decision, and Sarah Johnson's hands and body trembled visibly as she waited for them to read the verdict. And the verdict was that Sarah Marie Johnson was guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. Before her sentencing, family and friends made their pleas to the court for what sort of sentence they believed that she should get, and most of them said that she should get life in prison, that they didn't think she should ever get out of jail. Even her own brother Matt agreed with the sentiment, and he read a pretty heartfelt statement to her. He had written it down, but he said out loud, like he wrote something down, but he mostly wanted to speak candidly, and only really looked at his notes to keep him on track. And he said to the court and to his sister mostly, and I quote, "Sarah, Mom and Dad treated you like a princess. I don't know why you threw it away. Of all the things I miss their hugs, their bear hugs. And Judge, I would like to see the maximum, because after tomorrow, and you read your sentencing, I don't ever want to hear about her or this event ever again." He said this through tears, and she listened through tears. Sarah's grandmother, so Diane's mother, also made a statement to the court, mostly speaking directly to Sarah, just begging for an explanation, some closure, and letting Sarah know that despite everything, she still loved her. Sarah's attorney asked the court to just give her 15 years, and he said his explanation for his recommendation was, and I quote, "If you give her fixed life, all the opportunity to utilize the parole system and give her an opportunity to work towards parole, to have the hope, to be successful in the future, to return to the community as a productive person. If you give her fixed life, you take all that away." Sarah also finally spoke to the court herself during the penalty phase. She wanted to speak on her own behalf. She wouldn't do this during the trial, only during her penalty phase, before learning her fate. And she said to the court, and I quote, "I loved my parents and I love my family. I am deeply grieving the loss of my parents, as well as the loss of my family, my home, my friends, and my community. With the guidance of the Lord and the continued love and support of those who believe in me, I hope to rebuild my life and prove that I can be a productive member of society." In the end, Sarah Johnson was given 2 consecutive life sentences for her crimes, plus an additional 15 years with no possibility of parole. And after the sentencing was read, her family hugged each other and cried. After giving Sarah her sentence, the judge spoke to the court for an hour about his reasoning behind the sentence he chose, and he spoke a lot of that time to Sarah directly. And he said to Sarah about his reasoning for the sentencing he gave her, and I quote, "You had it all. You had a nice family, nice school, car, freedom. You had it all. In the final analysis, you had lots of options. You had all kinds of ways to not go down this road, and yet you elected the worst possible courses of conduct. And it's the most devastating, harshest option. Are you a safety risk? There's a lot of evidence here to suggest that you are a significant safety risk. I have come down on the side of protection of society in this risk analysis. The risk to society outweighs your individual needs and wants." This particular judge is a self-proclaimed big believer in probation and rehabilitation, but understands that some things can't be rehabilitated and some people can't be saved. And he believes that Sarah is one of these people. And he said of this, and I quote, "I'm a big believer in hope, but there's certain conduct that crosses the line. We're not talking, for instance, about a residue methamphetamine case. We're talking about one of the most severe crimes known to man. There is evidence that indicates she's not seeking rehabilitation, that she's just trying to get off. It's all about Sarah, and it's all about Sarah now." He continued by asking Sarah, why? Why? It's the ring that can't be taken out of the bell. Everyone in this room is asking, why? It defies explanation, except for the explanation of your selfish protection of your relationship with your former boyfriend. No one saw this coming. All of those things, in my mind, contribute to a significant risk of danger. A lesser sentence would trivialize these 2 lies. Society cannot tolerate and will not tolerate a child rebelling against their parents and killing them, the very people who were trying to protect you. After all was said and done, a member of the defense gave a signed statement to the Times News that apparently was written by Sarah, and it said, and I quote, "I am grieving the loss of my parents. I have lost my family, my home, my friends, and my community. I want to thank the people who believe in me and support me, especially my guardian and adoptive family." Sarah's grandmother, so Diane's mother, says that she struggles very much with coming to terms with the fact that her granddaughter murdered her daughter. Coming to terms with that and what that means and what that does to her and how that feels. And she said of this, and I quote, "It's indescribable. It really is. The heartbreak and the sorrow." Alan's sister said of the verdict against Sarah, and I quote, "We lost another member of the family today." Sarah's friends are also in disbelief that this happened and that she would make this decision, because Sarah, they're the same age, so they're seeing how young Sarah really is and that she threw her life away for nothing. Like, she's never going to have a life. She's never going to get married. She's never going to get to move out. She's never going to get to have kids. She's never going to get to have a life. She threw it away for nothing, and now she's stuck in jail in a cell for the rest of her life, and she refuses to see friends or family, so she's just totally alone. And now for a sort of like, where are they now moment, or a where were they then moment, like updates that have happened since then, is in 2012, Sarah tried to file a petition, I believe, for a new trial, stating that she had ineffective counsel in her initial trial. And she cited the fact that there was no blood on her, which her original attorney had already done. And she also cited the fact that her fingerprints weren't on the murder weapon, and that the only fingerprints on the murder weapon belonged to the gentleman, the tenant who lived in the house. So maybe he was guilty, but it was already determined that, like, he was gone and it was his gun, so of course his fingerprints are on it. And of course, like, this was denied. She didn't get the new trial. In 2017, Sarah also tried to get her life sentence reduced due to the new ruling on life sentences for juveniles being, like, not it fam, if you remember. The court did agree that the recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings forbid mandatory life sentences for juveniles, but her conviction ended up being upheld because they said that those rulings didn't impact Sarah's case because the sentencing judge had considered her age as a mitigating factor before sentencing her to life in prison. And apparently the U.S. Supreme Court left it up to the states on how they wanted to enforce these new restrictions. And since then, I believe Sarah has now exhausted all of her appeals, so she is in jail forever, for life, and that is what her family wants. So, that's that, yeah. And now I want to end this video with a little bit of information about Sarah's grandmother, Diane's mother, because I feel like this illustrates just how lasting the pain and the trauma of a murder like this is on the people who loved these people, because I just feel like heartbreak in this woman, and it really, really, like, just like will hit you right in the chest, because when these things happen, they don't just affect the people immediately involved, the victims and the killer, it affects everybody. And I think this is a good example of that. Diane's mother said that from time to time, immediately my eyes got all like welled up, don't do it. Diane's mother says that from time to time she'll get upset. She'll feel herself get upset about something going on in her life, and that she'll just hear her daughter's voice in her head telling her, "Mom, don't sweat the small stuff." And that's like how she remembers her daughter and who her daughter was. Her just being like a positive, uplifting person in her life that helped keep her centered. And as she started to say this, she just started to sob. And it broke my heart. No, that's it. And with that last little bit of information, that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Alan and Diane Johnson. Isn't that just so fucked up? To be murdered so brutally. Like, the way that they described it, man, especially with her mother, to be killed so brutally, and then to have the person who killed you like that be your own child, the person that you've given everything for. Your time, energy, youth, love. As a parent, you give up everything for your kids if you are a good parent, right? And it sounds like Alan and Diane did just that. These two people worked super hard to ensure that they and their kids had the best life, and it sounds like Sarah did. She's described as being treated like a princess, and she murdered the very people who gave her that sweet life for no reason, and that's so messed up. I am genuinely curious if there are any of you out there who do believe that Sarah is innocent, because I do know that the lack of blood on her is odd. It did come out that Sarah was very into watching true crime shows, so it is possible that she had picked up some tips and tricks on how to lessen the transfer of evidence, to keep herself clean. I could picture her then wearing those gloves, one on each hand, putting her robe on backwards. It was determined that the robe was worn backwards during the murder, by the way. I don't even think I mentioned that, but like it was put on backwards so it would cover more surface area. She could have put that shower cap that was found flushed down the toilet. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that. There was a shower cap that was flushed down the toilet that was found. Put that over her hair to, again, stop there being as much blood. So really at that point, all that's showing is like wrists and face. Murdered her parents and then did a quick face wash and hand wash before running out of the house screaming to the neighbors, you know. But that's just a theory. I don't know if that's how it happened, and I'm very curious as to what you think. If you or if anybody out there thinks that Sarah is innocent, please let me know down below. And if you do think she's innocent, let me know your theories of what you think actually happened. I'm very curious. We'll call it the question of the day. And let me know down below your answer.
So that was our true crime marathon. Thank you for hanging out with me. I think that that's pretty cool. If you made it to the end, put some sort of emoji. Let's put like a red heart in the description box because this is a very long video and that is crazy. Before you leave, I want to remind you about Anna Luisa and say thank you to them again for sponsoring the video because that's so great. And to remind you guys that they're having their holiday sale. So if you have any last minute shopping to get done, might I suggest Anna Luisa jewelry. I also want to thank you for hanging out. I don't want to do the whole outro spiel. I just want to say thank you. It's the holidays. I'm grateful for you. Remember last Thanksgiving when I cried? I feel the same way. I'm just very grateful to everybody who watches my videos. So I just want to thank you. And this is for you if you want to watch it. And this is my gift because this is what I can give. And yeah, that's it. Subscribe if you want, if you haven't. My membership's down below if you want that too. And honestly, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. Let us set you are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. In the meantime, take care of yourself.